Audiobook by Fate's Reader. Don't forget to subscribe and like the channel for more epic series. Drop your recommended novel below. We love to know what you want to hear next. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 461 Yearn, Forget-Me-Not. Mu Xianxia, dressed in a black dress, was stunned as she gripped the fragrance pouch in her hands tightly. She then suddenly burst into tears. She and Qin Mu were strangers who'd come together by chance, so talking about any deep feeling was naturally random nonsense. At that time, she had merely had a good impression of him and felt that he didn't look bad. He also had elegance and personality that matched her taste in men. For a poison master, it was very difficult to find a man that had an affinity with her. Most were either scared to death or got poisoned to death by her. But Qin Mu was a person who could accept her. The people of West Earth respected poison masters, but no one dared to love them. There were quite a number of previous poison masters who had died alone. They were temperamental people, and their methods were ruthless, so it was only natural that no one dared to love them. Qin Mu had kept the fragrance pouch she had given him, that handful of red beans, and brought it along when coming to Thunder Mountain City in West Earth to find her. Mu Xianxia had said that she knew he had not come for her. But when she looked at the pouch of red beans, the weak side of her inner heart was touched. Strangers may come together by chance, having yearned for it unknowingly. Qin Mu hadn't come to West Earth just because of the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor's stratagem, but also because he still had her in his heart. Silly boy, is it worth it to travel 10,000 miles for a stranger? However, Qin Mu seemed to be such a person. He and Xianxia were also strangers who'd met by chance, but he still pursued justice for her with no second thoughts. He saved the mother and daughter without hesitating to put himself in danger. The affairs of Xianxia and her daughter were not related to him, but he had still done it. He even brought Xianxia back to West Earth to take justice for them. Even though there was definitely the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor's idea somewhere along with it, Mu Xianxia was certain that the aim of the silly boy was to take justice for the mother and daughter. The dim-witted decision in other people's eyes was the big boy's code of conduct and an irreversible principle. To study the underlying principle to acquire knowledge is to know and act as one. By studying something or some profession to the end was studying the underlying principle to acquire knowledge. However, it didn't necessarily have to come from one's heart. Heart and mind as one was not necessarily a different kind of knowing and acting as one. It was the sign of a great master. Mu Xianxia was stunned. The first time they met, they were enemies who appreciated each other's talents. She had lost then. Her poison techniques had lost to his, and she admired that big boy very much. Even though she had gifted him red beans and stolen a kiss, it still hadn't been love. But in the meeting just then, it wasn't his poison technique that she saw, but his personality. Qin Mu's personality had won her over. Xiong family's matter had been caused by her. It was her poison which had felled numerous experts of True Heaven Palace and spoiled all of their cultivation. Only then was Yu family able to successfully seize True Heaven Palace in one strike. Without the backbone of Xiong family, they were defeated. The miserable deaths of many people at that time were all related to her. Xiong family's matter was caused by me, so I can't let my little man assume the responsibility for me. Mu Xianxia raised her head, and confidence flooded into her back once again as she smiled. In our West Earth, women are in charge, so how can I let my little man face the disaster I caused? Sisters of Thunder Mountain City. Her voice resonated with svelte and high spirits. Pack your bags and prepare for war. In Thunder Mountain City, countless divine arts practitioners skilled in poison techniques packed their luggage and soon gathered together. They looked at that chief of theirs and saw that she was glowing with vigor like never before. Her pretty face was shining with a luster like that of pearls, and she looked very charming. "Sister, where are we going?" a young girl asked. Mu Xianxia jumped and green vines slithered over from midair, landing under her feet to lift her up. Her voice was filled with a charm and laughter when she spoke next. "Of course we are going to chase after your brother-in-law and stuff this pouch of yearning red beans back into his hands. We have to make sure he holds onto it properly and never forgets this yearning. Or me, Mu Xianxia." "All right," the other girls roared with laughter. "Let's quickly head out." Such a good brother-in-law, we can't let any hussy snatch him away. Let's seize brother-in-law back. Seize brother-in-law back. Qin Mu returned to God Burial Valley of Lu family. The pitch-black coffins joined him, growing legs to run right after. In the sky, there were more black coffins, forming a dark cloud. Among them, there were chains holding a golden coffin that was really large and extremely eye-catching. Numerous black coffins escorted it in the sky, and Qin Mu was very bewildered why Lu Ruyan was insistent on bringing such a dangerous thing along. However, when he heard it was her daughter's idea, he didn't question it anymore. The little girl, Lu Jinqing, was a clever and cunning person. Since she wanted to bring along the golden coffin, there was definitely some use for it. As Qin Mu brought the forces of Lu family towards Sword River Valley, preparing to group up with He and the rest, he suddenly heard a loud and clear voice coming from behind him. "Little man, wait for me." Qin Mu turned his head back and couldn't help being stunned. The divine arts practitioners of Thunder Mountain City were sitting on all kinds of venomous beasts and venomous insects hurrying over while bustling with activity. There were spiders, centipedes, toads, snakes, venomous birds, beasts, wasps, and they were all over the sky. There were also numerous toxic plants that had been awakened by those divine arts practitioners, and highly toxic tree men were striking forward. There were also slender vines with flower maidens from poisonous flowers flapping their petals. There were even some venomous fish that had grown legs to sprint quickly on land. In the lead was Mu Yingxue, who looked to be in high spirits as she rushed toward him through the path opened up by the coffin army. Without any explanation, she jumped onto the dragon Qilin's head and stuffed the fragrance pouch into his hand before hugging him to plant a heavy kiss on his cheek. Qin Mu was at a loss while the girl was very proud of herself as she said loudly, "I want you to keep this yearning pouch with you forever and never throw it away. Never forget about me in your whole life. Can you do it?" With heroism filling up his chest, Qin Mu loudly stated, "Can!" Mu Yingxue turned her head back and waved at the sisters of Thunder Mountain City. He said, "Can. Sisters, aunts, let's take down True Heaven Palace and change the world." Cheers erupted from behind them. Beside the dragon Qilin, a small black coffin flipped over and Lu Jinqing popped her head out. Her hands were crossed in front of her chest, and she was pouting unhappily. "Little hussy," she grumbled when she took a glance at Mu Yingxue. Lu Ruyan's coffin flew to her side, and this chief of Lu family whispered, "Don't mind this little hussy who is so proud now. When she dies, let's make her a Lu." Banners were fluttering in Sword River Valley, and Qin Mu was astonished by the number of influential families of West Earth that had gathered and set up their camps. It should be the first time that West Earth had become so bustling. The flags of He family, Feng family, Gong family, Shi family, and Fu family were all raised up high, and there weren't the only ones. There were many others who'd come as well. All of the influential families specialized in different abilities. He family was skilled in formations. Feng family was skilled in controlling mountains. Gong family was skilled in controlling the river flow. Shi family was skilled in controlling grass and trees, while Fu family was skilled in controlling meteorological phenomenon. The other influential families also had their own specialties. The gathered people were mostly women. The number of them was still simply astounding. The woman army of hundreds of thousands stunned Qin Mu. Even though Eternal Peace Empire was very open and women could also be officials and join the army, they took up only 20% of the whole. Men were still in the majority. Yet in West Earth, the women took up 80% while the men were only 20%. On top of that, what the men did was usually running errands. This is a rare chance for the influential families of West Earth. If your family could be overthrown, Xiong family's decline would mean that they could receive greater freedom from True Heaven Palace. This is why they came here for an uprising. Qin Mu sucked in a deep breath and formed a fist when he looked in the direction of True Heaven Palace. On the journey to West Earth, he had only brought the Dragon Qilin and Xiong Cheer. It just him, a mount, and a weak girl with no soldiers at all. Yet he had amassed a several 100,000 women army that was prepared to attack West Earth's strongest True Heaven Palace. When he thought about it, he couldn't help growing so excited that his bones started trembling and his primordial spirit was about to fly out. Holding Xianxia's hand, he entered Bamboo City with Mu Yingxue, Lu Rian, and her daughter. The heads of all the influential families were gathered there and were anxiously awaiting his arrival. Qin Mu bowed low to the ground and said loudly, "Middle-earth's heavenly devil cult master Qin Mu pays his respects to all the sisters." Numerous women hurriedly returned the greeting. "Cult master Qin, no need for formalities." Qin Mu tugged on Xianxia, and she immediately bowed to pay her respects as well. Xia pays her respect to all the aunts. Everyone hurriedly returned her greeting to, "We dare not. Little princess, quickly get up." Qin Mu straightened up and smiled wide at them. Many women strengthen one's resolve, which dares to make sun and moon shine in new skies. Sisters, this little brother has come all the way from Middle-earth and hopes to see sister's abilities in true Heaven Palace. Sister E, can we begin our journey? He called on Bamboo City, and it uprooted itself. At the same time, all the heads of the influential families sent out their commands, and the land trembled while the clouds rushed forward. The women army of several 100,000 marched toward true Heavenly Palace. The dragon Qilin turned his head back to take a look, and he couldn't help sighing ruefully. Patriarch wasn't this awe-inspiring back then. Cult master is cult master after all. He came to West Earth for a bit, and has already hooked up with hundreds of thousands of girls. Far away in the sky, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Xianxia stood on top of a cloud and looked at the majestic sight from afar. Xianxia was dumbfounded, unable to say anything. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was also speechless. Imperial Preceptor, did you expect this result from the start? Xianxia finally returned to her senses and curiously examined the middle-aged man beside her. Even I, the previous Nai Kuei, wouldn't have such ability and power like Cult Master Qin. He could actually gather hundreds of thousands of people with a single summon. Isn't Cult Master Qin a little too scary? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor let out a shaky breath and muttered, "I knew he would cause trouble and definitely attract the attention of True Heaven Palace, but I didn't know he would be this good at it. True Heaven Palace will certainly feel threatened by this, and what is even better is that Ba Go will have no choice but to show himself. Once he suffers a setback, the god hidden in True Heaven Palace will have to show himself and let me have the chance to deal a fatal blow to him." He looked at the majestic women army and couldn't help shivering while shaking his head. Too terrifying, such cohesiveness is simply too terrifying. However, Cult Master Qin's talents lie in this, after all. Even I was tricked by him into joining Heavenly Saint Cult. If this little rascal ever decided to rebel. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 462. The Extremes of Sword Skills. We shall just follow from afar and hide properly. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor saw Qin Mu's women army off and said leisurely, "Wait for Ba Go and that god to make their move. Cult Master Qin will help us settle everything." Xianxia was deeply moved. Back then when she had asked for Qin Mu's help in Great Ruins, she hadn't thought that the big boy that saved them actually had such terrifying capabilities. He was able to stir up such a huge storm in West Earth. She had thought that he was only a disciple of an influential family who had some abilities. However, the more she understood him, the more she was moved by his extraordinariness. The huge Bamboo City sprinted through the vast land while Qin Mu and the heads of West Earth's influential families stood at the top of the city tower, managing their army to prevent the situation of the groups trampling over one another. The disciples of all the influential families in West Earth were not troops that were trained, so they had to spend quite some effort in managing them. Luckily, there was He, the formation expert who used formation skills to manage the disciples of the influential families. With her assistance, everything gradually became smooth and simple. West Earth's Sword Master Luo Yinyu pays his respects to Middle Earth's Cult Master Qin. Qin Mu looked at the long-haired girl that was walking over to him, and astonishment appeared on his face. He returned the greeting in a hurry. West Earth had 3 masters: Poison Master Mu Yingxue, Formation Master He, and Sword Master Luo Yinyu. Qin Mu was very familiar with Mu Yingxue and He, so only the Sword Master Luo Yinyu was a new face to him. She was different from the other women of West Earth. They liked to wear gold and silver, like crowns, necklaces, and numerous bracelets on their hands and legs, but there was not an accessory to be found on Swordmaster. Her clothes were also extremely simple. She wore only an ordinary robe that was simple yet elegant. It had no extra colors. Her hair was also unadorned. A simple string was used to tie it, ensuring that it wouldn't become messed up. Her black hair was reached her waist, like that of other women, and created a great contrast to her white clothing. The reason why she dressed so simply was because she was like a sword that couldn't contain any impurities. Any accessories would be impurities to her. She was a woman who had no other joys but for her sword, to which she was probably already married. When Qin Mu saw her, he felt as if there was a sword aimed at him. When she bowed, sword light shone intensely. It was incomparably sharp and stabbed straight at his Tao heart. Qin Mu bowed to return the greeting while easily blocking her sword will. Sword Master Luo Yinyu rose with a strange look in her eyes. Cult Master Qin is also a sword skill expert? Qin Mu inclined his head in a humble manner. I dare not say so. How many sword skill experts are there in the world? In terms of ability, there are countless that surpass me. However, in terms of attainments in sword skills, I can most likely be ranked as well. Sword Master Luo Yinyu grew even more curious and said, I had long wanted to go to Middle-earth to see the degree of swords there. Since Cult Master Qin is a sword expert from Middle-earth, can you introduce me to who are the ones that surpass you in sword skill? Qin Mu gave it some thought and shook his head. There should be no more people that surpass me in sword skills, but there are some who have already entered the realm of sword path, and I don't dare say how many of them there are. However, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor is definitely above me. There's also my family's village chief. He taught me 3 sword skills, and his attainments on the sword path are extraordinary. As for the other experts on the sword path, I don't know much about them, so I dare not speak of them. Sword path of sword skills? Luo Yinyu's face fell in disappointment as she muttered, Is there really someone who entered the sword path? I've concentrated on chasing after the end of sword skills for so many years, yet I never reached the sword path. There are actually people able to enter that kind of marvelous realm. Qin Mu could understand her disappointment. Luo Yinyu was at the stage of pursuing knowledge to the end, seeking the extreme comprehension of the sword skill. She most likely had already achieved the extremes in it, but she didn't have any idea about the sword path, which made her unable to enter it. Qin Mu telling her that there were numerous experts on the sword path in Middle-earth was a huge setback to her. Sword skills and sword path might only differ by a single word, but the difference between them was that of heaven and earth. No matter how good one's sword skill was, they would be insignificant in front of sword path experts. Qin Mu's curiosity was stirred, and he said, I've not seen the sword skills of your West Earth before, so I wonder how they differ from those of my Middle Earth. We had 14 forms before, but then Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor added 3 more forms, making the count reach 17 forms. Not long ago, I also added another form, making pushing the number to 18 forms of basic sword skills. How many forms does West Earth's sword skills have? Luo Yinyu's eyes went wide in astonishment. There are already 18 forms in Middle Earth's sword skills? My West Earth only has 14 forms. However, our sword skills rely on the sword spirit and emphasize on power. What we use might be different from your sword skills. Qin Mu instantly became excited. He had been researching about sword spirits the last few days, but he hadn't advanced by much. He kept on feeling that there was a lot to learn and not enough time. It was rare for him to meet a sword skill expert like Luo Yinyu from West Earth, so he naturally had to ask her for advice. The two of them discussed his problems in detail, and both of them reaped great benefits. West Earth's sword skills use spirits to wield their swords, which increased their power drastically, nearly doubling it. In Qin Mu's eyes, the sword skills of West Earth were somewhat lacking in excitement and far less intricate compared to those of Eternal Peace Empire. Even Luo Yinyu, the sword skill expert, was inferior when compared to the attainments of sword skills of numerous sects in Middle-earth. Yet the sword spirit could raise the power of her sword moves to a level that the experts of Middle-earth could only yearn for. When she executed basic sword skills, Every move and every form overflowed with awe-inspiring power which had been raised drastically. There was a heroic air that made others not dare to face it directly. Luo Yinyu saw the extraordinary points that the reform in Middle-earth had brought. The sword skills there were treacherous and had numerous variations. She was especially wary of them after seeing the 4 basic sword forms founded by Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and the one by Qin Mu. They gave the sword skills even more changes and variation, providing them with countless possibilities. Luo Yinyu tried using spiral sword form, coil sword form, drill sword form, and the 18th form Qin Mu had founded. She pondered over them, then said, "Something is strange. The first 14 basic sword forms of Middle-earth are no different from my West-earth. However, what concerns these 4 moves, even though they are also basic sword skills, the further one cultivates them, the more magic power they would require. It's especially obvious with the basic sword form founded by Cult Master Qin, since executing it one time will nearly exhaust half of my cultivation. If the 19th form is founded, won't it completely exhaust the cultivation of sword skill divine arts practitioners? When you reach the 20th sword form, will anyone even be able to execute it?" Qin Mu's heart trembled violently, and he had the feeling of having found his soulmate. His gaze became fervent. "You can also feel the 19th sword form?" Luo Yinyu looked at him with delight. "You too feel it?" The two of them looked at each other and smiled knowingly. "After I founded the 18th form, I felt a wish to continue." Qin Mu became perturbed, and he said everything on his mind. "At that time, I could still feel that there was a 19th form. At that time, I felt that there could very well be a 19th sword form. However, I was fighting with Sister Yi then, so I didn't dare to be distracted. So I didn't perform an in-depth investigation to the source of this feeling. However, the 19th sword form definitely exists. You also felt a 19th sword form, so that means that my feeling wasn't wrong." Luo Yinyu nodded. "The 19th sword form could be the crux for us to enter the sword path directly." The two of them grew excited. "That reminds me, Eternal Peace Empire is clearly close to the sea. So why do you refer to it as Middle-earth?" Qin Mu inquired. Luo Yinyu shook her head. "I don't understand much about the stuff outside since most of the time I'm concentrating on comprehending the sword." At the side, Chief Feng Kaidai of Feng family smiled and said, "Cult Master Qin, the name Middle-earth had always been around. It's to address the land of great ruins and the East. The East Sea near your Eternal Peace Empire is then called East-earth." The two youths stayed together to research sword skills and exchange ideas, attracting quite a number of people to observe. Qin Mu and Luo Yinyu were great masters in sword skills, and even though there were people whose cultivation realm surpassed them, they could only exclaim in admiration on the side. Qin Mu was quite puzzled by the words. "East Sea has no land, so why is it addressed as East-earth?" Feng Kaidai hadn't looked deep into this marvel and thus could only shake her head. "This I do not know. East Sea was once land, so it was addressed as East-earth," Chief Fu Yunxi of Fu family said. "In the cloud book of our Fu family, we have recorded matters regarding East and Middle-earths. It was written there that Middle-earth and East-earth are not divided by the current geography, but accordingly to the geography of long, long ago." Qin Mu's heart beat an extra time, and he suddenly thought of Bent Mountain Shrine. It had been erected on a majestic mountain which had sunk into the bottom of East Sea. The shrine was 5,000 yards below the sea surface. The bottom of the mountain was even farther from the sea surface. This meant that the East Sea had originally been a land that was known as East-earth. However, Fu Yunxi said that East-earth and Middle-earth were divided by the geography from a long time ago. That should have been even before founding Emperor era, when it was High Emperor era. High Emperor era should have belonged to East-earth, right? It is the East Sea now. The third move of sword picture is Calamity of High Emperor. It should probably be related to High Emperor era. Qin Mu sunk into deep thoughts. Sword picture had moves that village chief had founded, and Calamity of High Emperor was the third move of sword picture. In that case, village chief should have understood a part of High Emperor era's history. "Village chief, I will definitely go to Fengdu to save you." The youth secretly made a firm resolution. Suddenly, He Yi's loud voice reached him. "We are almost at True Heaven Palace." Everyone on guard. Sword Master Luo Yinyu immediately got up and walked toward Luo family. Fu Yushi, Fang Kaidai, Mu Yingxue, and Lu Rian all returned to the armies of their family. Qin Mu stood at the city tower, looking ahead with a trembling heart. He saw magnificent mountains standing in great numbers like silent 3,000 yards tall giants which existed between the heaven and earth. The mountains were similar to the giant Qin Mu had encountered near Fragrant Bloom City, just even larger and even more dangerous. Beside them were also sword peaks that were mountain peaks like swords. There were also bell peaks that resembled bells, cauldron peaks that were shaped like cauldrons, pagoda peaks that were shaped like pagodas, building peaks that were like multi-storied buildings. All those mountain peaks were spirit weapons of all kinds and forms. Besides them, there was a long river under the mountain that surged at a great speed through 9 bends and 18 curves. There was also a rainbow waterfall pouring down 10,000 yards. A sea of clouds could be faintly discernible in the sky, in which thunder and lightning flashed together. In the sea of clouds, a cluster of palaces seemed to be bathed in golden light. They were West Earth's true heaven palace. The sacred ground of West Earth was much harder to deal with than Qin Mu had imagined. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 463 Sword Skills and Sword Wounds. Qin Mu raised his head to look at the palaces in the sky from which many women flying out. They landed on the mountain peaks. True Heaven Palace should have long ago received news that Qin Mu had gathered some of the big influential families and gotten ready for their approach. Bang! A huge mountain peak suddenly exploded and countless rocks flew in all directions while others rolled down its sides. The mountain peak had suddenly changed into a majestic giant. It squatted down and pulled out his huge legs from the ground, shaking it endlessly. Yi raised her hand, and the huge bamboo city came to a stop. The mountain giant before them gradually stood. Its huge palm was the size of 100 fields, and as it streaked across the sky, violent wind howled. The palm then suddenly grabbed a sword-shaped mountain peak. Piercing sounds rang out when the sword-shaped mountain peak was actually pulled out from the ground by the mountain giant. Rocks rolled and fell in directions when he did that. By the time the mountain giant raised the sword, the earth and rocks over it had already completely fallen off, revealing a rusty item inside. It was a huge mountain peak sword. Qin Mu's face became solemn when he looked at the huge sword and mountain giant through the barely discernible fog. True Heaven Palace's background was too immense and even surpassed that of the sacred grounds of Middle-earth. No matter if it was Tao sect or Great Thunderclap Monastery, or even Heavenly Devil Cult, they didn't have such terrifying backgrounds. Bang bang. Huge explosions rang out, and mountains changed while forests became giants that were thousands of yards tall. They grabbed weapons of unimaginable size. They were the guardians of True Heaven Palace. Numerous disciples of True Heaven Palace stood on the shoulders or the heads of the mountain giants, raising up and down with the movement of their creatures while overflowing with murderous intent. Qin Mu took a look at Mu Yingxue. If she hadn't poisoned Xiong family, Yu family would have found it very difficult to seize True Heaven Palace and snatch the authority of Xiong family. Just the mountain giants alone were an incomparably terrifying power that surpassed an army of 1,000,000. Get into formation! He shouted loudly, and the women of He family in the city walked out. Each of them took out a formation flag which swayed in the wind. Instantly, numerous spirit weapons for formation skills fell out from the formation flags. The women of He family quickly assembled them, and Qin Mu saw an extremely shocking sight. The divine arts practitioners of He family were actually using spirit weapons for formation skills to assemble catapults that were 300 yards high. They were erected upright behind Bamboo City, and the winches whirled to tighten. The divine arts practitioners of Fang family executed their divine arts, and rocks rolled down non-stop from the mountain giants behind them. They combined into huge rock lumps that automatically rolled into the huge frames of the catapults. Countless female divine arts practitioners of She family scattered seeds which grew frantically throughout the mountain, forming a sea of green. It surged continuously as tree giants rose and strode forth. Sword Master Luo Yinyu raised her swords, and swooshing sounds rang in the air as tens of thousands of women of Luo family pulled out their swords as well. All of them were filled with heroism. Fu family's sister, Mu Yingxue suddenly shouted. Fu Yunqi gave an order, and the divine arts practitioners of Fu family summoned dark clouds. They formed a sea of clouds, covering an area of 1,000 miles. As lightning flashed and thunder boomed, incomparably thick tornadoes formed up. However, they twisted their bodies but didn't advance as they were controlled by the divine arts practitioners of Fu family. Mu Yingxue advanced with the divine arts practitioners of Mu family and threw all the highly toxic poisons they had into the wind. The tornadoes sucked them into the dark clouds and changed in color, becoming a bewitching green. Even the flashing lightning had a touch of green to its light. The entire cloud layer was filled with Mu family's deadliest poison. Violent wind surged from behind a youth at the city tower, fluttering his clothes. The wind was chilly, bringing away the excess heat from his body. His blood was running too hot. The female divine arts practitioners created a totally different atmosphere on the battlefield compared to the men of eternal peace, but it made his blood boil just the same. Women were a match for the men. Even though they were charming beauties, they were also strong warriors on the battlefield. The atmosphere was somber and desolate. The front of True Heaven Palace was overflowing with austere air. The black clouds that wanted to ravage the city were kept under control, with only the sound of the wind being audible. That kind of pressure could make one go mad. At that moment, a figure flew out from the palaces in the sea of clouds and passed the mountain giants who ignored it. Ba Go! The faces of He, Mu Yingxue, Fu Yuni and the rest changed slightly. They didn't show any cowardness when facing the mountain giants of True Heaven Palace, but when they caught sight of the figure flying at them, their expressions changed. He gave a soft shout, and Bamboo City split apart. Countless rocks floated into the air and quickly formed a defensive formation to protect the disciples of He family behind her. She herself was lifted up by one rock to float before her formation. Suddenly, there was one more person beside her. It was Qin Mu, warmth flooding He's heart. Sword spirits, celestial soldiers, Luo Inu shouted out, and the tens of thousands of female divine arts practitioners of Luo family raised their weapons with qi. Countless flying swords clanked and floated into the sky, transforming into a huge sword formation. Although the blades were numerous in numbers and seemed to be flying here and there, they were not messy at all. 8 pillars heaven, Fong Kai-dai shouted out, and the mountain giants behind her suddenly formed huge circular pillars that were able to support both heaven and earth. 8 mountain giants went forward and pulled the pillars out to carry on their shoulders while overflowing with murderous intent. Other families also executed their moves while watching the figure coming closer with nervousness. Even Lu Ruyin and Lu Jinxing were full of worry. They came to the front of the golden god coffin, ready to release the corpse within it any time. Qin Mu's heart trembled. Just Ba Go alone had pushed all of the influential families in West Earth to the brink of taking out all of their trump cards. At the sight of it, he couldn't help admitting that Ba Go was indeed awe-inspiring. How can this man with the surname Yu from high heavens make all the families in West Earth worry so, as if they are about to face a great enemy? Qin Mu couldn't help being bewildered. There weren't as many sects in West Earth as in Eternal Peace, and they were mainly ruled by influential families. The abilities of the 10 at the top were no small matter, and all of them were extraordinary in some way. Not to mention if a guest of high heavens, even if a god came down, the families shouldn't have to be so careful. Ba Go was definitely not just simply a guest of high heavens. Yet when the figure got close enough, Qin Mu realized that Ba Go wasn't fiendish looking like he had imagined. Instead, he was a man with an unordinary appearance. His build was tall and sturdy while his features were very handsome. The clothes he wore were made from an unknown material that draped. Every strand seemed to have been weaved by runes, and from time to time, an indiscernible light would emerge from the strands. His clothes were very fitting and showed that he didn't have any excess flesh. His dressing was that of a man from West Earth, with a white cloth wrapped around his head and golden chains crisscrossing over it. However, unlike other men, he had few other accessories. His nose bridge was high, but his gaze was gentle, giving a pleasant feeling to people who saw him for the first time. When Qin Mu laid eyes on him, He felt that the man looked pretty similar to Jade Sovereign of High Heavens. Qin Mu had once taken a look at the corpse of that man who was said to be a perfect man. Even though he had been killed by Emperor Yanfeng, his appearance had remained extraordinary. His temperament seems to be similar to that of Su Xianxia. Qin Mu examined him and was quite shocked. He actually felt that Ba Gou's bearing was also somewhat similar to that of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. Su Xianxia's bearing was of everything in the world having nothing to do with him. He had entered the mortal realm from above and worldly affairs couldn't taint him. This was also related to the technique he cultivated. Even though Qin Mu had pulled Su Xianxia down to the mortal realm, the worldly affairs still found it difficult to change that outstanding youth. He still looked like he could abandon them any time and leave. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, on the other hand, looked cold and was serious in speech and manner. It was a kind of invincible attitude of looking at all the smaller mountains down below after having ascended the highest one. He was a great master who had extraordinary achievements and who only had change and reform in his heart. All other ways of the world had been thrown away and any hindrance to his reform was only stumbling blocks. He would execute lightning-fast methods to get rid of each one of them. Ba Gou from High Heavens actually had Su Xianxia's temperament and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's bearing at the same time. Chief He, the man with the embroidered headband, flew over and greeted He and the rest. Chief Mu, Chief Lu, Chief Feng. Even though they were enemies, everyone returned his greeting. Ba Gou, the man in the embroidered headband, looked at Qin Mu, revealing his teeth as he smiled before greeting him. Human Emperor Qin. Qin Mu's heart shook as he returned the greeting. Ba Gou, may I ask, how does Ba Gou know about such a small and negligible existence as I? Human Emperor Qin, there's no need for you to be unduly humble. The man in the embroidered headband said. I'm always paying attention to the human emperors of the successive generations. For the previous human emperor, I even personally came down to the lower bound. You should have seen how his 4 limbs look like, right? He stretched out his hand in a grabbing motion, and a woman of Mu family couldn't prevent herself from flying in front of him. She tried to struggle, but it was in vain. The man in the embroidered headband pulled out his sword, and a severed arm fell off. He gently waved his hand with a smile, and the severed arm flew toward Qin Mu. Cult Master Qin, please take a look. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched as his vital qi flooded out to examine the wound in detail. His brow wrinkled, and he croaked, the exact same sword wound. It was me. The man in the embroidered headband smiled warmly at him. Looks like he didn't hide the sword wounds from you. Behind the killing formations of all the influential families, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Xianxia were hiding, not getting close. However, when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor saw the sword light of the man in the embroidered headband, his expression changed drastically and he lost his composure. Crap! I know the origin of this Ba Gou. Quickly, all the influential families of West Earth should retreat. Xianxia shook her head. The arrow is already in the bowstring, and there's no choice but to release it. We couldn't retreat now even if we wanted. Why did Imperial Preceptor suddenly lose his composure? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor took in a long breath as his eyes flashed. I recognize this sword skill, this sword path. It's the sword skill that cut off old human emperor's 4 limbs. That man is not from High Heavens you family, but a true god from the upper bound. In front of the formation, Qin Mu suddenly relaxed and smiled without any sign of hiding any kind of nervousness. Your true body can't come down to the lower bound, can it? If it could, would you still be hiding like a fly in West Earth? Then since it isn't your true body, he stretched his hand forward, and his expression grew savage. Beating you to death isn't going to be any trouble. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 464, Azura's Battlefield. The man in the embroidered headband dispersed his magic power, and the corpse of the female divine arts practitioner of Mu family fell from the sky. Such a small child, yet already possessed the same unrealistic fantasy as the previous human emperor. Even though his sword had only cut off the arm of the female divine arts practitioner of Mu family, his sword will had passed through her whole body, dissolving and wiping out her primordial spirit. With his attainments in sword path, he didn't even need to hurt the opponent directly. Just his sword will alone was enough to crush the opponent's primordial spirit. Mu Yingxue formed her hands into fists, but forced herself to restrain her anger. She didn't blow up. The one dead was her clansman. But against the mysterious Ba Go, she didn't dare to make a rash move. The man with the embroidered headband looked over at all the chiefs while behind him were the majestic mountains and true heaven palace that had an extraordinary air. He said leisurely, "Chiefs of West Earth, you guys chose to rebel for the true heaven palace's authority. But you have no idea that its authority comes from me. I'll give you guys a way out. If you return now and chop this human Emperor Qin's head off for me before sending it to true heaven palace, I'll let bygones be bygones." Qin Mu shivered when he saw that quite a number of the chiefs were swayed. The army of West Earth he had pulled over wasn't a piece of iron board, but was strung together by benefits. Even though most of the female chiefs were beautiful like flowers and Qin Mu even had quite some deep relationships with them, they were still akin to sect and cult masters of eternal peace. The beautiful women placed the benefit of their clan atop everything else. Personal emotions wouldn't warp the logical minds of those women. If they backed out because of the man's words, Qin Mu wouldn't be too surprised. Suddenly, Mu Yingxue shook the bells on her wrist which rang in the silence with a crisp sound and smiled. "All of you can withdraw, but my Mu family can't. What my Mu family owes to Xiong family has to be returned. Otherwise, my conscience will never be at ease." He looked at the others indifferently. "You Buchuan died in my bamboo city, which will make it hard for me to escape censure, so why don't I just overthrow the rule of you family? My He family is not backing out as well." Lu Ruyan hesitated for a moment, then looked at Lu Jinqing who was on the small coffin beside her and licking it seriously. Noticing the attention, she suddenly raised her head to smile sweetly. Just like Cult Master Qin said, he's just a clone of a true god and not difficult to kill. Only if the true god came down to the lower bound would it be too difficult. "Mother, I have already accepted Sister Cheer's hawthorn candy, so I have to do something for Xiong family. On top of that," her smile became even sweeter. "Who can ensure that you family won't find trouble with us after this? They are very petty, but if we get rid of them, Xiong family's mother and daughter will rule true heaven palace and even rely on our Lu family. The gain is bigger than the risk, so why not?" Qin Mu became at ease. Even though Lu Jinqing looked like a little girl, she was actually an old fox. Her words sounded harmless, but she had mentioned what was on everyone's minds. With her sentence, the other influential families ascertained their decision, and Ba Go wouldn't be able to change their thoughts anymore. Among all the chiefs, maybe only Mu Yingxue was truly sincere about wanting to help Xiong Xiu and Xiong Cheer, since she was redeeming herself. The others were more or less only concerned about their own benefits, but to Qin Mu that was enough. The man with the embroidered headband smiled. "Human beings will die for riches, just as birds die for food. Even lucid, elegant, and refined women like you are also foolish and fail to live up to their bodies. Fine, since you guys want to die, I can only send all of you on your way." He was about to turn and leave, but he suddenly smiled and said, "Since Ba Go is already here, there's no need for you to leave." Countless huge rocks from behind her surged forward, toward the man. At the same time, almost all the chiefs also executed their own abilities. The mountain giants behind Fang Kaidai raised huge mountain pillars, using mountain peaks as weapons to crash against the man with the embroidered headband. Luo Yinyu pulled out her sword to stab out, and countless flying swords followed closely after her sharp blade, which was sticking close to the mountain peak that was about to attack the man. Mu Yingxue flicked her finger, and Fu Yunqi pressed down heavily. Lightning burst forth, and the storm swept the poison Mu Yingxue had thrown toward the man. Lu Ruyan and Lu Jinqing undid the chains on the golden coffin, and they rose up like black flood dragons toward the man. The heads of West Earth's influential families held no regard for the rules of the martial world. They swarmed forward without any warning, wishing to prevent Ba Go from returning behind his army no matter what. Qin Mu nodded silently. "Well done." The man with the embroidered headband walked toward True Heaven Palace as sword light flashed behind him. slicing apart everyone's attacks. Before He's formation could close, a path was sliced open by his sword. The mountain pillars were sliced apart by the perfect sword light, and the storm was intercepted by the sword that cut across the sky. Chains were touched by the tip of the sword and sent back. Good sword skills. Based on sword skills, no one in West Earth is his opponent. He indeed has some good sword skills. Qin Mu's expression was solemn. The sword skill of the man with the embroidered headband had reached perfection and a realm so mysterious that even gods and spirits could not predict his moves. Cheer. Quickly activate the green dragon bead. Xianxia executed green dragon bead, and green light instantly shone brightly. Dragon roars rang out, and the sky filled with green light that rushed toward True Heaven Palace. Wherever it passed, everything was lignified, and even the mountain giants surrounding True Heaven Palace suddenly became stiff. Green light emanated from their bodies as countless green vines grew rapidly around them. The women on the top of those mountain giants went under the control of the green dragon bead at that instant. Pop, pop, pop. Tender sprouts and flowers grew out from their faces. Green dragon bead, one of the 4 spirit treasures of True Heaven Palace, had burst forth with astonishing power in the hands of the little girl. The man with the embroidered headband also suddenly froze when the green light shone on him. His body seemed to be lignifying as well. The power of green dragon bead was beyond imagination. At that moment, from the palaces in the sea of clouds, a few women of True Heaven Palace walked out. From each of their hands, a precious bead rose up. The 3 precious beads rose into the air, growing brighter and brighter. One of the beads had the soul of a tortoise and a snake, another the soul of a white tiger, while the last one glowed with flame. There was a divine bird roaming inside it. The 3 precious beads shone, and their lights clashed with the light of the green dragon bead. Dragon roars instantly reverberated as the green dragon flew out from the precious bead. The moment it did so, it grew incomparably huge. The dragon then flew to coil around the majestic mountains, creating an incomparably astonishing sight. In front of True Heaven Palace, the light of the 3 spirit treasures also became more and more vigorous. The white tiger, black tortoise, flying serpent, and vermilion bird flew out from the precious beads. 2. The white tiger crouched down on a mountaintop and roared toward the sky. The vermilion bird gave a long cry and flapped its wings to spread a sea of fire. The black tortoise stepped on the sea, and it rumbled under its feet before rising into the sky while the flying serpent shuttled to and fro within it. The 3 women of True Heaven Palace had activated the other 3 spirit treasures to fight against Xianxia. They worked together to suppress the power of green dragon bead. The traces of lignification on the man rapidly faded away, and he gave a slight smile. The flying sword behind his back flew back into his sheath, and the man retreated back into True Heaven Palace. "Get rid of them," he said from inside. The lignification of the women on the head of the mountain giants wore off when green dragon bead's power was suppressed. Thus they also escaped. The green light on the mountain giants' bodies also faded away. They moved their huge bodies and swung mountain-shaped sharp swords to attack the influential families of West Earth. He shouted sternly, and the huge catapult automatically released. They swung their long arms and sent the rock humans flying. They were pitifully small compared to the mountain giants, but they still stretched out when they were thrown and pounced on their larger counterparts. Flames burst forth in midair, and the rock humans were shattered before they could land. They were destroyed under the attacks of the mountain giants' huge weapons. Cult legacy treasures had burst forth with terrifying power in the hands of the mountain giants, turning the rock humans into powder. They covered the ground in a layer of dust. Yet there were still quite a number of rock humans who had landed on the mountain giants' bodies and scaled up to their heads. The disciples of True Heaven Palace executed their divine arts to their limits as though they were facing great enemies when faced with such an attack. They pulled out the spirits from their opponents' bodies, making many of them return to a pile of rocks that rolled down to the ground. Whoosh! Heavy rain began to fall, and green-colored droplets landed as lightning and thunder scoured the sky. It was the poison storm created by the divine arts practitioners of Mu and Fu families. Within it, even the crackling lightning was green in color and contained poison. The lightning mixed with the rain and struck down on the mountaintop of every one of the mountain giants. More women of true heaven palace flew out, and countless spirit weapons flew forth. They were golden and silver bracelets of all sizes that spread among the mountains. The spinning golden and silver bracelets attracted lightning and rainwater, binding them inside themselves before sending them down the mountainsides. The dark clouds in the sky shook and tornadoes descended, twisting their bodies as they swept toward the gold and silver bracelets. The woman who was controlling Black Tortoise Bead activated it, and the sea poured down on the dark clouds, swallowing them whole along with the lightning and tornadoes. Kill! Shouts came from Qin Mu's side, and the huge catapult strode several miles forward before squatting down. Numerous women jumped into their huge frames and were slung into the fight by them. Numerous mountains giants went forth to clash with the mountain giants that guarded True Heaven Palace. Tens of thousands of disciples stood on them, and countless spirit weapons flew out to fight with the disciples of True Heaven Palace. Many vines stretched out from the sky and swept toward the mountain giants. The women of Shi family stepped on the vines to travel past the mountains, attacking the women of True Heaven Palace while the vines coiled around the mountains. Rumble! A pagoda-shaped mountain pressed down and crushed countless women of Shi family. However, no one had the time to feel sorrow. Those still alive took control of the long rivers that were like flood dragons and sent them at the mountains. They clashed with the waterfall and long river that came down from the mountaintop. There were countless water giants standing up from the big river as well, wielding knives and blades made from mysterious ice. The group pounced on the women before them. The land before True Heaven Palace had become a huge Azura's battlefield, and the warriors in it were the charming women. Fatty Dragon, protect Cheer! Qin Mu jumped onto He's stone that was floating in midair. The huge bamboo city had already separated into pieces and become a flood of huge rocks that rose into the sky. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 465 Lightning in West Earth. The huge stone formation changed continuously as countless cubes arranged and assembled themselves properly, forming a floating stone formation that frantically rushed into the battlefield. Qin Mu stood on one huge stone that rose up and down. He watched the cubes of all sizes moving about continuously. They sometimes formed a wall and sometimes dispersed like smoke. He's attainments in formation skills were extremely high. Bamboo City entered the battle under her control and opened up a path for the divine arts practitioners of He family behind. Rumble! A mountain giant rushed over with a weapon which was extremely strange. It was a thick club that was the shape of a mountain and had brass bells of all sizes. However, even the smallest of them was terrifyingly huge. The mountain giant smashed the club at Bamboo City's formation. Instantly, the brass bells hanging on it rang, and a terrifying sound wave bombarded Bamboo City, shattering many stones into pieces. He immediately changed her formation, and countless huge rocks attached themselves to the club. In an instant, the terrifying weapon was completely covered up and the ringings of the bells were muted. The mountain spent a great deal of effort to raise the club, but before it could swing it, it saw numerous huge rock rolling down the club and onto his arm. He executed the formation, and its power burst forth, breaking the mountain giant's arm. The mountain giant seemed to have not felt anything for it, outstretched its other hand in a grabbing motion as if nothing had happened. Upon entering the huge stone formation, it tried to catch He, but his other arm was soon also covered by huge rocks. His palm became denser and denser, heavier and heavier. He family's formation skills are indeed extraordinary. Qin Mu praised and suddenly jumped out of Bamboo City's formation. He landed onto the arm of the mountain giant and leaped around as though he was flying, rushing toward its head. On the mountaintop, there was another battlefield, where numerous divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace welcomed the divine arts practitioners of Gong family. The two sides were fighting fiercely on the mountaintop, but were stuck in a stalemate. Qin Mu rushed over, and a ball of silver light exploded with a wave of his hand. It was his sword pellet that was 2 feet in radius. It rose into the sky and spun rapidly. Countless swords burst forth from within it. They became sword lights and passed through the fighting crowd. All 17 sword forms were unleashed, and all of them had myriads of transformations. 8,000 swords and 17 kinds of transformations drowned out every woman on the mountaintop. Qin Mu leaped down from the mountain. The 8,000 swords behind him were like wind blowing the clouds, sticking closely to him. They clanked as they returned back into the sword pellet above his head. On the mountaintop, the divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace collapsed and died. Only the female divine arts practitioners of Gong family were left. Halfway down the mountain, a grass dragon flew out and caught Qin Mu. Chief Xianxia of Xi family stood on its head, and beside her, green vines surged forward like flood dragons. They grew frantically, blooming and bearing fruit. The countless green vines carried the female divine arts practitioners of Xi family up the bodies of the mountain giants while planting their roots between the mountain rocks. The practitioners executed their divine arts to make grasses, trees, and vines grow on the bodies of the mountain giants and dismember them. Suddenly, terrifying pulses came from vermilion bird bead, and a huge vermilion bird flapped its wings. A blazing sea of fire rushed toward Xianxia, who was among the mountains. She stood on the head of the grass dragon as she cast her spell. Green light shrouded her and formed into a huge ball of grass to face the sea of fire. The next instant, it was ignited by the blazing fire. By the time the sea of fire passed through, there was little of the grass ball left but for its shape. It then split open, and Xianxia brought Qin Mu higher and higher into the sky with help of the green vine on which she was standing. Qin Mu leaped down from it and streaked diagonally through the air. He stretched out his hand to grab at what was above him and pulled out Carefree Sword from the sword pellet. Carefree Sword grew in size, and the thousands of swords entered it one after another. Qin Mu's falling speed grew faster and faster, and his aura grew stronger and stronger too. The next instant, an explosion rang out when his body crashed onto a mountain peak. The incomparably huge mountain giant to which it belonged stumbled from the impact. When Qin Mu landed, the terrifying impact raised a ring of pressure which blew away most of the female disciples of True Heaven Palace. Only a few who were on Seven Stars Realm and Celestial Being Realm could barely keep their footing. But the noise after the explosion didn't disappear. The space hummed and trembled. It was due to Carefree Sword slicing straight down through the giant. Boom! The next moment, cracking sounds came from the head of the mountain giant. A huge crack spread through the middle of it. Even though Qin Mu hadn't managed to split the head apart, the power of his sword was no small matter. When Carefree Sword slashed down again, countless flying swords swirled out from it and sliced forward. In an instant, 8,000 flying swords sliced through the air from one end of the mountaintop to the other. Severed limbs rained down. Before they could even touch the ground, Qin Mu had already rushed forward. Sword lights flashed and sliced among two strong practitioners of True Heaven Palace that were of Celestial Being Realm. The two women had been caught off guard and had already suffered numerous injuries. When he came close, the three of them fluttered around like butterflies. The two women were experts of True Heaven Palace after all. Even though they weren't proficient in close combat and had been injured by Qin Mu, they won in the density of their cultivation, which far surpassed that of Qin Mu. Soon they regained their balance. The primordial spirits of the two women flew out. When they were about to raise in midair, ready to jump at Qin Mu, grass dragons suddenly came from below and grew under their feet, quickly binding them. While Chief Xianxia landed on the head of the mountain giant, Qin Mu leaped up. The hearts of the practitioners' brows had a red mark each. Their corporeal bodies had been stabbed by Carefree Sword, and their brains were destroyed. Xianxia was only a step later than Qin Mu to come down, but he had already wiped out all the divine arts practitioners of True Heaven Palace on the mountaintop. Only the two experts of Celestial Being Realm were left. She knew that if the two experts released their primordial spirits that Qin Mu was definitely no match for them and might get killed instead. So she chose to first bind their corporeal bodies. However, she hadn't expected that Qin Mu would end the battle so quickly. She had just managed to land on the mountaintop when Qin Mu had already killed the two experts of Celestial Being Realm. Xianxia looked over and saw him sprinting through the sky. Countless flying swords swooshed as they rushed forward, lying down a path under the youth's feet to carry him into the distance. Heavenly Devil Cult Master is truly extraordinary, Xianxia exclaimed. Qin Mu was rushing toward another mountain giant when terrifying aura wafted off True Heaven Palace. Its experts flew out and entered the battlefield. The number of experts in True Heaven Palace isn't little. It should be the elders who made the move, right? Their targets should be the heads of each influential family. Just as Qin Mu thought that, he saw Mu Yingxue on a white cloud face the experts of True Heaven Palace. Behind her was Fu Yunqi executing her divine arts to move the clouds from right behind her. Qin Mu put away his sword and executed heaven-pilfering divine legs to sprint over frantically. He caught up with Mu Yingxue in a few breaths' time and landed by her side on the cloud. You poison. I supplement. The two of them looked at each other with smiles. They faced the strong practitioners of True Heaven Palace, the elders on Life and Death Realm who released their primordial spirits. They took the god forms of the four great spirit bodies and rushed toward Qin Mu and Mu Yingxue. They flicked their fingers as one poisoned while the other supplemented. The latter assisted in raising the toxicity, and as they executed their methods, the sea of clouds passed by them, bringing the poison toward the elders of True Heaven Palace. It was Fu Yunqi's attack. The sea of clouds churned and drowned out the elders of True Heaven Palace along with their primordial spirits. They were extraordinary and executed all kinds of moves to break the sea of clouds. But suddenly, the expressions of the women changed drastically as their flesh started melting and their primordial spirits started disintegrating. Before long, they turned into piles of dried-up bones that fell to the ground. With the third and fourth ranking experts of the poison path working together, even gods wouldn't be able to handle them, much less some elders. Qin Mu and Mu Yingxue separated and rushed toward the other mountain giants. Rumble. A mountain giant collapsed, and its huge body dropped to the ground, causing terrifying tremors. Cheers erupted from the divine arts practitioners of He family, and they were followed by another loud rumble. One more mountain giant fell. The influential families worked together, and their eyes had turned red from the slaughter. After overthrowing the mountain giants, Fang family dismembered them to change them into hundreds of smaller, hill giants to continue fighting in the battle. When combined with the formation of He family, the meteorological attacks of Fu family, the grass and trees of Shi family, the long and wide rivers of Gong family, the poisons of Mu family, and the sword skills of Luo family, the strength of the rebellion was continuously growing. Gradually, the battle quietened down, for there were only a couple thousand hill giants left. Countless divine arts practitioners from all the families were gasping for air as they stood among blocks of rock. The mountain giants of True Heaven Palace had finally been wiped out by them. Tens of thousands of female divine arts practitioners raised their heads and looked at True Heaven Palace that was high above them. They had finally achieved the first step of their plan. They had faced off against the sacred ground and were about to walk into the place which represented the divine right of West Earth. Even though they had sacrificed countless sisters, the overthrow of True Heaven Palace was an immense achievement for which any sacrifice was worth it. True Heaven Palace was silent. Suddenly, the sound of gold and metal clanking rang out. God's aura slowly spread out, growing stronger and stronger. With True Heaven Palace as the center, the God's aura flooded out in all directions, suppressing the divine arts practitioners of all the influential families. They found it hard even to breathe. The clanking of metal became louder and louder. Finally, a golden sculpture walked out of the palace gate with its eyes closed. Its body was tall, sturdy, and over 30 yards tall. The runes on its body blinked with light. The god statue opened its eyes, and divine light shone in the sky before sweeping toward the ground. The statues were like true living gods. Moments later, another god statue walked out, followed by the third, fourth, fifth. 7 god statues walked out of True Heaven Palace and stood in front of the gate. The divine light from their eyes lit up the whole place. They were god statues that had been awakened by the technique to awaken spirits. They had experienced who knew how many years of baptism to become abnormally strong like gods. Rattling sounds came from True Heaven Palace, and tens of thousands of divine arts practitioners from Yu family walked out one after another. True Heaven Palace Master appeared under the palace gate and looked down at the warriors that were ready to attack her place, and scorn appeared on her face. Everyone's blood ran cold. Over 10,000 people had died or suffered injuries just to wipe out the mountain giants that served as guards. Yet they were merely the outer strength of true Heaven Palace. The core had been preserved and was even more terrifying. The 7 god statues were probably enough to wipe out all of the influential families. With tens of thousands of strong practitioners of Yu family in addition, what awaited the rebels was a complete and utter defeat. Qin Mu looked around and saw despair written on the faces of even He, Feng Kai-dai, and Luo Yinyu. He went to Fu Yunqi's side and asked her, "Sister Yunqi, you can control meteorological phenomenon, so can you control lightning?" Fu Yunqi nodded and said with some sadness, "My Fu family is skilled in controlling the meteorological phenomenon, and lightning is also part of it. However, after this battle, the technique of meteorological phenomenon in West Earth is probably going to be lost." Qin Mu smiled. "How much lightning can you guys control?" Fu Yunqi was slightly stunned by his words and took a look at him. Qin Mu took out the true dragon's nest and said solemnly, "Fatty dragon, come over." The dragon Qilin immediately ran over, and Qin Mu landed on his back. He took out 5 thunderpot and placed it on the dragon Qilin's head. He felt a chill down his bones and immediately laughed. "Cult Master, Human Emperor, Old Master Qin, why are you doing this? This little beast's constitution is weak and bones frail. How can I withstand being blown to death by 10,000 lightning bolts? With the experts of Fu family, you won't be hurt at all. Get up and fly forward," Qin Mu said in consolation. While shivering uncontrollably, the dragon Qilin stepped on the fire clouds to fly up. Qin Mu said solemnly, "Sister Yunqi, have all of the disciples of Fu family follow me." True Heaven Palace Master smiled when she saw the dragon Qilin carrying Qin Mu over. He grinned back at her, then suddenly threw his sword pellet up. It split open, and 8,000 swords stabbed 5 thunder cauldron in unison. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 466 Old Schemer. The moment 8,000 flying swords stabbed 5 thunderpot, the world became incomparably silent, without any sound to be heard. Even the flying swords made no sound. Then, the space above 5 thunderpot exploded as a trace of lightning shot out. The black lightning stretched upward and exploded, pouring toward the sky. Standing in front of the palace gate, True Heaven Palace Master saw the black lightning, which looked like a flood dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It then split up, and the incomparably bright lightning seemed like a bunch of flood dragons scuttling upward. In an instant, there were more than 10,000 bolts that were rushing up into the sky. Yet the next instant, they once again split up into 100 million flood dragons. An incomparably bright cloud formed in front of True Heaven Palace, and 5 thunderpot floated into the sky, releasing lightning bolts that continuously scuttled upward into the thundercloud. Meanwhile, behind the thundercloud, Fu Yunqi had tens of thousands of women of Fu family to execute their divine arts, prodding the thundercloud to rush at True Heaven Palace. The palace master's expression changed drastically, and she grabbed for the black tortoise bead that one of the elders of Yu family was using, before her fingers could wrap around it. However, the terrifying thundercloud had already reached True Heaven Palace. Wherever it passed, the visions formed by white tiger bead, vermilion bird bead, and black tortoise bead were all disintegrated. The sea vaporized, the fire was extinguished, and the golden mountain crumbled. Boom! The first lightning struck and went straight for True Heaven Palace. An explosion rang out when it hit a god statue. The first bolt of lightning was like a spark falling into a boiling pot of oil, instantly igniting everything inside. It was also like the first raindrop from a heavy rain cloud, and what followed was billions and billions of lightning bolts streaking across the sky and drowning out True Heaven Palace. Black Tortoise Divine Shield. True Heaven Palace Master shouted out while struggling for her life to activate Black Tortoise Bead. A huge Black Tortoise's shield then expanded outward, covering the front of True Heaven Palace. Boom! Countless bolts of lightning exploded upon striking the Black Tortoise's shield, and the surface of the divine shield continuously shrunk from being compressed. True Heaven Palace Matter coughed out blood as she struggled to defend her people. Black Tortoise Divine Shield soon was no longer able to protect all of the disciples of True Heaven Palace. The sea of thunderstorms swept in, and countless women vanished in a puff of smoke. Even the 8 god statues whose auras were close to those of gods also couldn't endure the thunderstorm. When they rushed to fight it, their limbs actually melted, turning them into molten gold and copper. When Xianxia looked at True Heaven Palace from afar, she saw it had been transformed into a sea of lightning. Countless bolts burst, making the place incomparably bright. Earlier, the girl's green dragon bead had to fight with the other 3 great spirit treasures. But once the thundercloud destroyed their power, the pressure on her was greatly reduced. She could finally take a breather. Cheer. The green dragon's attribute is lightning. Xianxia suddenly appeared behind her and said gently, "Let's use this green dragon bead to send our enemies on their way." Mother! Xianxia was both surprised and delighted. Xianxia revealed a smile and covered her daughter's small hands with her own. They held the green dragon bead together and said in a low voice, "Xiong family's deaths need to be avenged with their enemies' deaths." Boundless green light poured out from green dragon bead and transformed into a green dragon that rushed into the thundercloud. The power of the lightning instantly rose dramatically. True Heaven Palace Master saw this, and her heart fell into despair. "You family is finished." Black Tortoise Divine Shield exploded into pieces, and the boundless thunderstorm drowned out her and the disciples of You family behind her. At that moment, a sword light pierced through the boundless thunderstorm. Bago broke through it and went straight for Xianxia. His sword light seemed to be perfected, sweeping away everything before it. Even the thunderstorm was sliced apart. His sword skills and sword path had reached perfection, and even the thunderstorm couldn't hurt him. The sword light was incomparably quick and looked as though it had come from outer space. Lightning turned into fine powder, and even the brightest flash of it couldn't mask the light bursting from the sword. Before it reached Xianxia and her daughter's face, however, a sword light suddenly appeared and blocked that sword with a clink. "Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor?" Bago smiled. "I've long known you were in West Earth, but you have a vulgar natural disposition, always hiding in the dark. However, you could never find a chance to attack me, right? In the end, it was still I who forced you out." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked over, stepping on the air like it was flat ground. He had no expression and wore green clothing. A sword was in his right hand while his left was behind his back, clutching sword secrets. Bago wore white, but he also had a hand behind his back clutching sword secrets. The 2 figures moved up and down through the thunderstorm. Even though the sound of thunder was world-shaking, it still couldn't cover the clash of the swords. The clinks were like beads falling on a jade plate, ringing out continuously. Under the 5 thunder pot, Qin Mu was being pulled in by the intense lightning energy. Its force of attraction sucked him and the dragon Qilin toward the bolts of lightning. Even the fat dragon Qilin seemed to only weigh as much as paper, being drawn by the electric current. He flailed helplessly, but there was nothing on which he could grab. Qin Mu also felt that he had become incomparably light, and his hair flew in all directions. Among his strands, lightning crisscrossed and shuttled randomly while crackling. He even felt all the hair on his body filling with fine bolts of lightning as the terrifying power hit his body. It felt as if he had been stabbed all over by white immortal's needles. There was no place that wasn't in pain. Qin Mu exhausted all of his energy to execute 9 Heaven's Eyes awakening skill, and the rays of lightning also filled his eyes. He could barely see the dragon Qilin, even if the beast's mane had risen up and even the scales were standing upright. Lightning rolled across them, bouncing back and forth. Qin Mu took out the true dragon's nest. Its weight pressed him down, and he couldn't help grunting. However, he finally suppressed the pull of the lightning, and his body finally fell from the sky. On his way, he crashed into the dragon Qilin and brought him down as well. With both hands hugging the dragon's nest, he used its weight to escape from the lightning's pull. When he was a good distance away, he raised his head to look up at the sky. 5 thunderpot floated there, raising higher and higher. His 8,000 swords seemed to be frozen in time and floated around the 5 thunderpot. Lightning passed through them as if they were lightning rods, attracting it on purpose. The flying swords turned red-hot from the terrifying energy, and Qin Mu worried if they could even withstand the impact of the divine lightning from 5 thunder pot. He broke free of the lightning pull when green light shone in the sky. He raised his head and saw the green dragon bead detonating the thundercloud. "You family is finished," he murmured. The thunder was so loud that even he himself couldn't hear his words. He then saw Ba Go flying over and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor intercepting him. A green and a white figure fought each other in the thundercloud. "Old schemer!" Qin Mu spat out and observed the battle of the 2 great experts. He saw that they did not use sword skill divine arts, but instead held the swords in their right hands while clutching sword secrets in their left behind their backs. Their movements were extremely fast and hard to discern. The sword secrets behind their backs were changing continuously as though they were calculating something. Qin Mu was quite surprised. The changes in both of their sword secrets were simply too fast for him to see them clearly. He could only struggle to memorize the changes of the hand signs as he faintly felt that their sword secrets were extremely important. As for the fight between Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, it had already reached a degree of simplicity. There were completely no changes in their sword skills, and there were only a few basic sword forms. However, every attack would cause the space around the swords to vibrate. Their divine arts could be faintly seen to be hiding behind that vibration. The sword path hidden within was not something that Qin Mu could comprehend. As expected of the big sicko that appears once every 500 years. His attainments in sword path have actually risen so fast. Qin Mu tried his best to remember a few sword secrets when the god statues braced against countless bolts of divine lightning and rushed into the thunderstorm. They exploded with terrifying god aura and worked together to disperse the thundercloud in one strike. Countless bolts of lightning instantly poured down and struck everywhere. The 8 god statues grew tattered, with not one of them remaining in a good condition. But they were still overflowing with battle power and tried to reach Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. The man seemed to be completely unaware of it and continued to fight with Ba Go while Xianxia brought Xianxia closer. They raised the green dragon bead from which green light was bursting forth. It lignified the bodies of the 8 god statues and froze them in the air. Suddenly, a lignified statue twisted its neck around, and a strange smile appeared on the god statue's face. It stretched its hand out, and the green dragon bead in Xianxia's hands flew out against her will, rushing over toward the hand of the god statue. "Little girl, thank you." Xianxia was stunned and lost all control of the green dragon bead, while Xianxia felt a chill run down her spine. "Be careful. That's the god of true heaven Pa." Before she could finish her sentence, multicolored lights emanated from Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's head. A flying bridge broke through the air, and it seemed to be able to reach inconceivable places. The boundless divine light seemed to be coming from the end of time and space as it filled the 9 heavens. At the end of the bridge was a cluster of celestial palaces that could be seen faintly, but which weren't clear. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's primordial spirit rushed out from that hazy celestial palace and stepped onto the divine bridge. His sword flew over, seemingly disregarding space. The sword light passed through time, and the instant that God's statue took hold of the green dragon bead, the primordial spirit penetrated its brow. The blade pierced to the back of its head. Blood dripped down the god statue's forehead, and there were blood and brain matter flowing out from the back of the head as well. The damage didn't seem like it had been done to a god statue, but a living form. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's expressionless face finally broke into a smile as his primordial spirit soared back into the air. With a hand behind his back and a hand holding a sword, he circled around Ba Go. "You were never my target. Chi, chi, chi." He attacked with his primordial spirit from 2 sides, and the sword lights flashed as they severed Ba Go's limbs. He then raised his sword to cut off Ba Go's head. "Divine Bridge!" Qin Mu cried out in alarm, and his nervousness finally settled down. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was no doubt the saint that appears once every 500 years. Only half a year had passed since Qin Mu and the rest had established the space algebra model of the Divine Bridge, and he had actually managed to cultivate the divine bridge. Old schemer, you finished patching your divine bridge and entered the celestial palace, so you are already a god. Yet you still hide in the corner and scheme against people. Qin Mu cursed him silently while shouts of countless women rang out behind him. Under the leadership of the heads of all clans, the divine arts practitioners of all the influential families attacked True Heaven Palace. Mu Yingxue passed by Qin Mu's side and said in a low voice, "Little man, while Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor is still alive, never rebel. You can't outsmart him." He also passed by his side and whispered, "If you rebel, you'll die a swift death. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor is too cunning." Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he thought to himself, "I've never even considered rebelling. However, Imperial Preceptor, this guy is really cunning." Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 467 Celestial Palace. Qin Mu soared into the sky and saw that the vibrations of 5 Thunderpot were slowly stopping. Fu Yunxi with numerous women of Fu family were guiding the lightning in their surroundings away. "Cult Master Qin, your swords!" Fu Yunxi shouted out. Qin Mu summoned his flying swords, and the 8,000 of them gathered together into a sword pellet that was the size of a tangerine. How did the sword pellet shrink so much? Qin Mu was slightly stunned. He was about to grab his sword pellet when a few girls from Fu family flew over with nervous expressions. "Cult Master Qin, don't move." Qin Mu stayed motionless while the girls muttered something under their breaths. Bolts of lightning flew out from his body, pulled out by the girls. "There was still some lightning in your body. Because you haven't come into contact with anyone, it hasn't burst forth," one of the girls said. "If you had touched something, the power would have burst forth. The lightning in the big bottle gourd is divine lightning that has terrifying power. Now that we have taken away the lightning, you can move as you wish." Qin Mu gave his thanks when he heard a rumbling. He looked toward the source of the sound and saw that the dragon Qilin was trying to step on fire clouds to slow his landing. However, before he could do that, the power of lightning in his body suddenly burst forth. The lightning escaped from the dragon Qilin's body, crackled, and struck everything around him. The huge fatty was like a lightning ball, bouncing up and down. In an instant, the dragon Qilin was charred. The girls of Fu family hurriedly rushed over while Qin Mu pretended not to see anything. He instead stretched his hand to grab the sword pellet. Its weight the same, but it was much smaller. It could fit in his palm and was much easier to control than before. He couldn't hold back his delight. "By borrowing 5 Thunderpot's power to refine my sword pellet to such a step, I'm not far from cultivating sword into water." "Cult Master, didn't you say that I wouldn't get harmed?" Smoke billowed out from the dragon Qilin's mouth when he spoke. Qin Mu pretended not to hear anything and put back 5 Thunderpot back into the true dragon's nest before rushing to True Heaven Palace. "Cult Master!" The dragon Qilin wanted to rush after him, but more women of Fu family surrounded him. "Stop moving around, you fatty. Your body is so big and you even held that huge bottle gourd, so you have the most lightning in your body. Be careful of being electrocuted to death if you run around more." The dragon Qilin immediately went still and smiled. "Sisters, I'm not disfigured, am I? My dragon scales are the most beautiful and majestic, so they can't be destroyed. This?" The girls looked at him, troubled. The dragon Qilin was suspicious and wanted to twist his head around to look at his body. However, because he was too fat and his neck was too thick, he couldn't achieve that. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was the first to land in front of True Heaven Palace's gate. There were charred bodies and huge pits made by the lightning strikes everywhere around it. They were still emitting black smoke, and there were some places that were still in flames. True Heaven Palace Master was collapsed on the floor, from where she looked at the middle-aged man that was walking toward her. She pleaded in a soft voice, "I'm pregnant. Consider the baby in my stomach. Please don't kill me." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked to her side and said indifferently, "Whether you are pregnant or not has nothing to do with me. I have no grudge with you, so I won't purposely harm you. I just want this True Heaven Palace, this West Earth." True Heaven Palace Master was slightly stunned. Xianxia brought Xianxia to the front of the palace. and the corners of True Heaven Palace Master's eyes twitched. Nai Kue, I'm pregnant. Many of the women in my Xiong family were also pregnant when you executed them. Intense hatred could be seen in Xiong Shiyu's eyes when she snatched the black tortoise bead from the prone woman's hands before taking Xiong Chier's green dragon bead too. She lowered her voice then and said, "Have you ever pitied them?" The green dragon bead shined on True Heaven Palace Master. She wanted to escape, but her body and primordial spirit swiftly lignified. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a wooden sculpture that seemed in the middle of a struggle. Xiong Shiyu let out a shaky breath and brought Xiong Chier out of True Heaven Palace while saying coldly, "I won't kill you, but I won't let you off just because you're pregnant. Become a wooden sculpture in front of the palace gate and kneel here forever." The women of the influential families rushed into True Heaven Palace to kill the remaining members of Yu family. Qin Mu also came over and saw that the palace was extremely wide and had many alleys. There were many members of Yu family hidden all throughout it. Some of the strong practitioners of Yu family used vermilion bird bead and white tiger bead to continue fighting back. The power of those two beads was strangely powerful, because even though the cultivation of the people controlling those two spirit treasures wasn't very high, they could still unleash astonishing power. Qin Mu slaughtered his way into the palace with everyone while thinking, "Pangong Tso should still be in the palace, right? No matter what, I can't let him off this time." Suddenly, golden light shone when a woman raised a golden, translucent bead. Inside it was the soul of a white tiger. When golden light burst forth from the bead, people who got caught by it instantly broke into pieces. Qin Mu executed his sword pellet in a hurry, and 8,000 swords surrounded him. The noise of battle could be heard in the distance, but he got blown backward by the golden light, along with his swords. Qin Mu tumbled several times before coming to a stop. He then saw that he had flown dozens of yards. White tiger bead. He dodged into a huge hall when the golden light came pouring in like a flood through the one he'd been in moments ago. Qin Mu focused his gaze to look at it and saw that wherever the golden light passed, gold qi seemed to scatter. The women who had died under the golden light had been injured by the incomparably sharp gold qi. Qin Mu hugged a huge pillar and exerted force from his waist, planning to lift it up and use it to squash the expert of Yu family, which was controlling the white tiger bead. The pillar didn't budge at all. Qin Mu gave a grunt and exerted more force. However, the pillar still didn't budge. Cult Master Qin, this is True Heaven Palace. Suddenly, Qin Mu heard Lu Zhenxing's voice. He was slightly stunned when he saw a bunch of black coffins escorting the golden god coffin inside. Lu family's mother and daughter were sitting on their own coffins. The little girl put down her hawthorn candy with a smile and said, "True Heaven Palace, a real celestial palace." Astonished, Qin Mu cried out, "Your meaning? This celestial palace fell from the heavens. It's not a fake." Lu Zhenxing jumped out of her coffin after stabbing the hawthorn candy into it. She climbed onto the golden coffin and peeled off one talisman after another. "Quickly move aside. The old thing is coming out. Keep the chain properly." While she spoke, the golden coffin suddenly opened up and a god's aura burst forth with a heart-gripping shout. A majestic figure rushed out toward the golden light. Boom! A loud explosion came from the back of the palace, and a chewing sound could be heard. Lu Zhenxing was extremely nervous and instructed the people of Lu family, "Quickly pull the chains back. Faster. Drag that old thing back. Don't be scared. The white tiger bead is in his mouth, so he'll be suppressed by it. Faster. Faster." Chains rattled as the experts of Lu family quickly pulled them back from their numerous black coffins. After a moment, a tall and sturdy corpse of a god was dragged back. It was struggling with all its might, trying to break free. Lu Zhenxing and Lu Ruyin went forward and exerted all their strength to pull the god's corpse back into the coffin. Lu Zhengqing climbed onto the head of the god's corpse and punched its nose furiously with her small fists while shouting, "Spit it out! Quickly spit it out!" The cheeks of the god's corpse were bulging, so it was obvious that something was hidden inside them. The god's corpse looked at the daring little girl as though it wanted to eat her up. However, its 4 limbs were chained so it couldn't move. The item in the corpse's mouth was the white tiger bead which had been swallowed along with the expert of True Heaven Palace that had held it. But once the white tiger bead had gone into its mouth, it realized how terrifying it was. The white tiger bead not only didn't go down its throat, but even almost assimilated the god's corpse. Lu Jinxing beat the nose of the god's corpse until it was all bloody. The god's corpse finally couldn't resist any longer and opened its mouth to spit out the white tiger bead along with a puff of corpse poison toward Lu Jinxing. Bang! The coffin closed, and Lu Jinxing quickly pasted the sealing talismans back before picking up the white tiger bead from the floor. She beamed with joy before jumping back onto her own small coffin and pulling out the hawthorn candy for another lick. She smiled at Qin Mu and said, "Brother Qin, we are going back. Come find us at God Burial Valley to play with us when you're free." Qin Mu laughed loudly and waved at them. "Let's go." The coffin flipped over with a bang and covered the little girl inside. Lu Jinxing's dull voice, however, still reached the outside, and it sounded full of pride. "No more fighting. Return to God Burial Valley. Our Lu family is not here to shatter the authority of True Heaven Palace. With the white tiger bead, our Lu family's God Burial Valley can also become a sacred ground of West Earth." Numerous black coffins escorted the golden coffin in their withdrawal from True Heaven Palace. Little sister Lu Jinxing is extraordinary and might just be able to create a corpse sacred ground. Qin Mu continued to head further into True Heaven Palace while thinking to himself, "However, I shouldn't call her little sister since her age should be similar to that of her mother Lu Ruyan. They should both be 400 to 500 years old." In the depths of True Heaven Palace, there was a spirit treasure that had an astonishing power. Vermilion bird bead incinerated everything through which its true fire passed. Only the palace of True Heaven Palace itself was left untouched. There were people from the influential families pouring forth towards the power of Vermilion bird bead. It was evident that they planned to take hold of it before Xianxia and her daughter could take it for themselves. So it's Cult Master Qin. From another huge hall, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked out with a rare smile. He nodded to Qin Mu in acknowledgement. Qin Mu walked forward and asked in doubt, "Imperial Preceptor, with your current abilities, stealing the 3 great spirit beads isn't difficult, yet you disregard the treasures of True Heaven Palace. What exactly are you searching for?" "The history." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked to another palace while saying leisurely, "The treasures of True Heaven Palace belong to West Earth and I won't fight over them. To me, even though the treasures are tempting, the history of True Heaven Palace is the true wealth. Cult Master Qin, there's no need to fight over those things and struggle for power. Follow me and let's witness the history of True Heaven Palace." His intention was for the youth to come with him. Imperial Preceptor's setup is extraordinary. If I was greedy for the treasures of True Heaven Palace, wouldn't you despise me? Qin Mu said. He followed Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor to the other palace. True Heaven Palace's palaces were grand and majestic. Even though the war was still ongoing with all kinds of divine arts and spirit weapons flying in the sky, the ground level was perfectly fine. Dao Sect, Great Thunderclap Monastery, Little Jade Capital were all losers. But even they recorded their history, so how could the winner not immortalize their own victorious history? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked into a hall where numerous disciples of Yu family hid. They immediately attacked, but Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor just waved his hand and their abundant strength seemed to have lost meaning. They crashed against the 4 walls of the palace, unable to move. I have already seen the history recorded by Dao Sect, Little Jade Capital, and Great Thunderclap Monastery. Now I would like to see the history written by the winner. Imperial Preceptor waved his hand again, and the numerous women of Yu family that were pressed against the walls couldn't stop themselves from moving to the sides, so the murals behind them were revealed. Qin Mu looked at the murals and saw a painting with a god descending from the sky on a cluster of palaces. The god looked somewhat similar to Bago. In the second painting, Bago came to meet a female god which was on equal footing with him and functioned as his rival. She's none other than the founder of True Heaven Palace, True Heaven Old Mother. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor expression became one of deep thought. Since she was able to stand on an equal footing with Ba Go, she shouldn't have been killed by a single strike from me. It's a little strange. Qin Mu was slightly stunned when he recalled the wooden god statue he had seen in the desert. Its face was similar to the appearance of true Heaven Old Mother. He looked to the next painting, but Ba Go's figure was no longer there. The third painting was of true Heaven Old Mother using vermilion bird bead to transform the ground into a barren desert filled with fierce flames. The flaming desert! Qin Mu narrowed his eyes. The amount of magic power required to change an area of tens of thousands of miles into a flaming desert was simply terrifying. Cult Master, do you think someone with her abilities would be killed by me in one strike? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor asked. Qin Mu shivered. She's still alive. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor nodded. The true Heaven Old Mother I killed in one strike was most probably just a god's statue. Her path of nature creation has myriads of changes, and she could even awaken mountains and rivers to become moving lifeforms. So creating a fake body couldn't be considered hard for her. Could she be somewhere around here? Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 468 Banquet of the Celestial Heavens. Qin Mu had an eerie feeling. If true Heaven Old Mother really still hid in True Heaven Palace, she was hiding while they were standing right under the spotlight. If true Heaven Old Mother was to land a sneak attack on them, who could block her? Qin Mu didn't know if Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor could block her, but he himself definitely couldn't. Even if true Heaven Old Mother couldn't kill Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, she could definitely kill him. Is she targeting him or me? Qin Mu blinked. The threat Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor posed was even bigger when before as he had cultivated Divine Bridge. He had gotten rid of Ba Go and her fake body, so by right, he should be her target. But in the flaming desert, true Heaven Old Mother's god statues had already laid their hands on Qin Mu numerous times. On top of that, the invasion of True Heaven Palace had a lot to do with him. Compared to Imperial Preceptor, true Heaven Old Mother's hatred for Qin Mu should be even deeper. No matter what, I need to be by Imperial Preceptor's side. I can't take a step away from him. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stretched his hand out and moved it to the side. Numerous women on the wall slid to the side and revealed the fourth mural. It recorded a battle between True Heaven Old Mother, Sun Ship and Moon Ship. That battle had been initiated by True Heaven Old Mother when she attacked Great Ruins. It attracted the Moon and Sun ships, then retreated toward the flaming desert where she managed to destroy them. The sight of the battle on the mural was extremely majestic. The huge land ships brought the suns and moons that flew in the sky. Sun and Moon Guardians stood on the huge ships with towering physiques, but their faces were wretched. It was clear from one glance that they were evil people. Yet it wasn't only True Heaven Old Mother that fought against them. There were also some other gods in the sky. However, on the mural, those gods were drawn very tiny, while True Heaven Old Mother was valiant and strong, with an indomitable spirit. The other gods were simply infants in front of her. Is True Heaven Old Mother really so strong? Qin Mu couldn't help doubting what he saw. Let me tell you a story so you will understand why True Heaven Old Mother isn't strong at all. One day, the Emperor brought me and the ministers out for a hunt. When we caught our prey, the Emperor ordered a painter to do a painting, and that painter had also drawn the Emperor to be that large, said Imperial Preceptor. He raised his right hand and made a gesture of extending 2 fingers to show the size of himself in the painting. And I was this small. The Emperor was indomitable while the ministers and I were all very tiny. Among them, I was the tiniest. On top of that, when the painter drew me, he drew me to be very wretched and fiendish, with a cunning and sinister expression. The Emperor wasn't satisfied, so he ordered the painter to redraw it, but it ended up the same. Thus, the Emperor dismissed him, telling him to scram back home. Qin Mu understood what he meant and smiled. The person who painted this mural was bootlicking True Heaven Old Mother. She shouldn't be stronger than you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have resorted to using fake bodies to attack you. True Heaven Old Mother's abilities should be very strong, but her battle power should have a big flaw. Her magic power is extremely strong, but her spells are also in the path of all things having spirit and all things having soul. If she doesn't show herself, I can't do anything to her. But if she shows herself, she's dead. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had a lot of confidence, but he suddenly changed the topic. He seemed to be warning Qin Mu when he said, "There are bootlickers beside the emperor, so how can there be none beside others with power?" However, these kind of people aren't scary. It's their thoughts that are scary. The painter drew me and the ministers as tiny figures, and it is understandable, but he shouldn't have drawn me to be sinister and cunning, since it involved his personal loathing. He wanted to use the chance to bootlick and influence the emperor's view toward me, to make the emperor think that I'm sinister and cunning. He wanted to use it to get rid of me and stop the reform. Putting bootlicking and a stab in the back together was too much. He looked at Qin Mu with a smile that was not really a smile. Cult Master has an important position, and even the emperor can't match up to your authority sometimes. You need to be careful of people who hide daggers behind their farts. Qin Mu was between laughter and tears. Hiding daggers behind their farts. Imperial Preceptor was both refined and vulgar at the same time. When he was refined, he could harangue with deaf and butcher, but when he was vulgar, he could even say phrases like hiding daggers behind farts. However, he was speaking the truth. It was indeed not hard to encounter such people in life that would stab their competitors in the back with flattery while harboring unfathomable motives. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's warning was very right. On the mural, True Heaven Old Mother is assisted by other gods. But where did they come from? Qin Mu examined the mural and inspected the pictures of the other gods in it, trying to recognize their faces. He suddenly saw one person which looked familiar. That's Jade Sovereign. Could the others also be the gods of high heavens? No, they shouldn't all be gods of high heavens. He recognized another face. He took out a scroll from his Taotai sack and gently unfolded it. He placed it side by side for comparison and checked the god in the painting again. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was slightly stunned. Isn't this the painting of paying respect to the soul that Cult Master drew? It is. Qin Mu raised his head to examine the mural. The divine art of paying respect to the soul that Pangong Tso uses is extremely strange. When he pays respect to a soul, an apparition of a god appears behind him. I painted it here. Imperial Preceptor, please take a look. Doesn't this god in my painting look similar to that god? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked back and forth a few times, then nodded. Doubt appeared on Qin Mu's face, and he went into deep thought. That god of Pangong Tso had once appeared in this world and was the same as True Heaven Old Mother. One of them founded True Heaven Palace and the other one founded Roland's Golden Palace. In that case, is he still in this world? If he is still alive. Chills ran down his back even though he wasn't cold. Pangong Tso's divine art killed to whoever he paid respect. If the god himself was to execute it, who could withstand him paying his respect? The mural here only records the history of True Heaven Old Mother and not what I wanted. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head and walked out of the hall. If True Heaven Palace is really part of the celestial palaces, there should be even more ancient history recorded on the murals and not just the history of True Heaven Palace. There must be another hall for older history. Qin Mu followed him out, and only then did the women of Yu family fall to the ground, regaining their movement. The battle outside was still continuing and the situation was extremely messy. All of the influential families were fighting over Vermilion Bird Bead. They were hindering each other and making dirty moves. The power of Vermilion Bird Bead was unusually strong and not any inferior to that of Green Dragon Bead. It was one of the 4 great spirit treasures of True Heaven Palace, so it naturally invoked quite a fight among people who wanted to obtain it. Even though women held the authority in West Earth, their internal conflicts and power struggle were no inferior to those in Eternal Peace. Qin Mu followed Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor to the main hall of True Heaven Palace and saw that the murals there were different from the other palaces. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stood in front of one and looked at it calmly. The corners of his eyes suddenly twitched and fear spread across his face. Qin Mu looked at the mural and saw the imposing celestial heavens. There was a person dressed like the heavenly emperor inviting gods for a banquet. There were countless of them who chose to attend. Earth count. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently when he saw Earth Count with horns on his head among the gods. In the painting, Earth Count's position was extremely high, yet his face still couldn't be distinguished. And he wasn't the only one like that. That meant that there were many existences that were like Earth Count. In the painting, the gods were all frozen in different poses, drawn so vividly that they looked like they were about to step out and come to life. This showed that the painter who had painted the mural was exceptionally brilliant. Qin Mu's gaze swept through the gods, but he found no sign of true Heaven Old Mother or even Ba Go. Could it be that true Heaven Old Mother wasn't even born back then? The corners of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's eyes were still trembling when he croaked out, "This is the true Celestial Palace. The true Celestial Palace. It's no wonder that even founding Emperor era was wiped out." Qin Mu grabbed his hand, and it was actually shaking. Fear and hesitation could be seen in the depths of the middle-aged man's vacant eyes. Imperial Preceptor is scared by a painting? Qin Mu laughed. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor struggled free, but his voice was still hoarse. "Aren't you scared? Don't you see how many gods there are in this celestial palace? Don't you see Earth Count among them too? Don't you understand that the destruction of founding Emperor era was probably due to the gods in this celestial palace?" Despair appeared on his face and he laughed. "I thought I could abolish the degenerates and return the world a clear heaven and earth. I hoped to prevent people from being deceived anymore and break the gods in the temples and in their hearts so they would have the courage to fight the heavens. But isn't all that just a joke? Cult Master Qin, you don't understand anything. If I continue with the reform, Eternal Peace Empire will end up the same." Reform. He was completely disheartened and fell into a daze. He waved his hands while saying, "I'm not going to high heavens anymore. When I return to eternal peace, I will bring my wife into seclusion. Cult Master, you continue being the Cult Master. As for the reform, don't touch it again." He turned around to walk out of the hall with a bleak expression. He had lost all his courage to continue fighting. "Heavenly King, you just now asked me if I understand or not. Let me answer you." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stopped in his tracks. "I know." Qin Mu's smile was more radiant than ever before. "I'm even more deeply involved than you. The founding emperor also had the surname Qin, and the orphan of the eradicated founding emperor empire is right in front of you." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor trembled. He turned around to look at him, his words coming out in a stutter. You. Qin Mu showed him his white teeth as he smiled radiantly. "My name might be fake, but my surname isn't. Founding Emperor's Qin is my Qin. If I'm not scared, what should you be scared of? Heavenly King, I suddenly have an idea. Help me grind my inkstone." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was still in shock from Qin Mu's words and didn't understand what he meant. Qin Mu took out his brush and threw the inkstone at him. He looked with interest at the painting which had inflicted so much damage to Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. After a moment, his eyes lit up and he found the crux of the matter. With a smile, he asked, "Is the ink ready?" Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was in a daze, barely having caught the inkstone. Qin Mu smiled and spoke once more. "Heavenly King, this isn't like you. Where's the saint that appears once every 500 years? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor took in a deep breath and threw out all the thoughts in his mind, focusing on grinding ink. Qin Mu soaked the brush full of ink and placed a few strokes at the bottom right corner of the mural. After he was done, he smiled and said, "Help me wash my brush." "You!" Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor could barely hold back his anger. Founding Emperor era ended over 20,000 years ago, and the 100th heir of founding emperor might not be any more respected than a farmer. If you make a fool out of me, I'll create trouble for you and make sure they haunt you forever. Qin Mu laughed loudly and said, "We will leave after you finish washing." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor washed the brush with dedication. He was serious in everything he did and was never careless. Qin Mu put away his brush and inkstone before grabbing the middle-aged man's hand. He dragged him toward the mural with a smile. "Let me bring you to a meeting, the banquet of the celestial heavens." The two of them hurled themselves against the mural and vanished as they entered the painting. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 469, A Thousand Men with Nowhere to Look. The scenery in front of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's eyes suddenly changed. When the light came back, they had come to the celestial palaces. They were majestic, and sacred mountains extended far into the distance. Divine light shone upon the boundless world. Is this the world in the painting? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was incomparably astonished. If they were in the world in the painting, wasn't it a bit too vast? He looked into the distance, but there was no end to the celestial palaces. Gods filled the sky above. There were some that were imposing, some that were divine, and some that transcended worldliness. However, most of the gods were walking to and fro, searching and calling their friends while exchanging cups of wine and drinking together in a large group. Qin Mu had brought Imperial Preceptor into the painting and the banquet of the celestial heavens. There were long corridors around them that were like bridges, flying rainbows, sun, and moon hanging above the pavilion, and lanterns with flaming divine birds inside that acted as candles and were giving off heat. There were also goddesses playing strings and exotic wind instruments. Some women were dancing on the lotus leaves, while a deluge of heavenly flowers fell around them. Some of the gods that were drunk stumbled left and right, raising their wine jars while teasing goddesses that avoided them from shyness. It was too much for Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's eyes to take in. They were located at the center of the banquet, with countless gods in their surroundings. In the distance, light from the sacred mountain shone. Earth Count was not far from them, and on his head were the horns of the 9 bends. He sat motionlessly with flames circling under his body like an abyss. There were a few more extremely imposing existences high above. Their faces were blurry, but the awe-inspiring feeling they gave off was no inferior. Imperial Preceptor, you are now like a country bumpkin, similar to me when I first entered Border Dragon City. Qin Mu laughed loudly and suddenly took a pot of wine from a goddess beside him. He raised it to his mouth to take a hearty drink. The goddess grew furious at him and shouted out, "Where is this brat from? This is the sacred wine for the high gods. So how can you touch it? Pesky woman!" Qin Mu raised a leg and kicked that goddess away. He grabbed another pot of wine that flew up from the plate and stuffed it into Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's hands. He then jumped onto a jade table in front of a god high above to drink heartily. That god was furious and raised his palm to slap him. But Qin Mu raised his own hand and pulled out his sword, cutting off an arm. He laughed loudly and flipped the jade table while shouting, "Poems of the sun and moon with wine of the immortals, hero of the land flying up the 9 heavens." Chi, the head of the god from high above, was sliced off, and Qin Mu barged into another hall, creating a ruckus in the heavens. Countless gods were furious and attacked him. Sword lights flashed in Qin Mu's hand, and he fought off all the high gods. He cut off their heads, which rolled to Earth Count's side. Qin Mu hung them on Earth Count's horn and laughed. Banished from the highly respected registry of Peng Lai, adorning precious clothing in front of the Jade Hall of Fangzhong, Earth Count exploded with fury and his body shook, instantly changing into a divine body that was 100,000 feet tall. Sacred fire spread out beneath his feet. Qin Mu executed his sword pellet, and 8,000 swords circled around Earth Count. They swirled to join into spiral sword form and sliced the deity into countless pieces. Qin Mu rubbed his hands, and the flying swords swept out in all directions like long dragons. His excitement rose as he killed and recited loudly, meeting the dragon's body of 1,000 feet, yet still remaining in the layers of Phoenix's feathers. Countless gods swarmed toward him like a flood that threatened to drown him. Divine light soared into the heavens, and Qin Mu rushed out from a sea of cut-off limbs. He strummed on his swords and sang, abandoning all restraint. 1,000 men with nowhere to look. 10,000 gods won't tolerate the force when looking back. Imperial Preceptor, let me break the gods in your heart. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor laughed loudly, and his earlier dispiritedness was washed away. His spirit rose up once more, and he shouted loudly, "The gods in my heart, Why should you be the one to destroy them? He walked over with sword light scattering from his hand. His battle power was higher than that of Qin Mu, and everywhere he passed gods fell. In Numinous Sky Hall, countless gods and devils swarmed forward to attack them. Qin Mu and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor stood side by side, massacring everyone in front of the heavenly gate. After a moment, the corpses of the gods and devils filled the entire mountain. Yet there were still endless gods rushing over at the two with shouts demanding slaughter. How many more of them do we have to kill? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor asked in a shout. Guard the gate. I'll kill Celestial Emperor. You go. Qin Mu agreed. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor rushed into Numinous Sky Hall where gods' corpses lay strewn all over the ground. Boom! Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor fell backward and smashed the wall of the hall beside Qin Mu, and the youth jumped in shock. The gods around them were clearly very weak, so the painter who had drawn them was clearly lacking in ability. It resulted in a reality where even Qin Mu was able to massacre the gods. However, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had been sent back by the Celestial Emperor. Qin Mu blinked and realized that their situation was pretty bad. This painter must have also been a bootlicker. He used all his best techniques on the Celestial Emperor, so he is much more powerful than the rest of the gods. Qin Mu was very clear how powerful a painting could be, since he had learned from death. The power of the painting came not only from the painter's technique, but also where it had been used to the greatest effect. The greater the painting technique, the stronger the painting would be. Of course, this depended on the hard work of the painter. The one who had done the mural had painted the other gods and devils carelessly, not spending a lot of effort on them, so they weren't strong at all. Even an existence such as Earth Count was only SOSO. But it was even more important to know who was the target. For example, when Def had painted the young village chief, that picture of Sword God carrying his sword had held astonishing power. When the mural's painter had painted Celestial Emperor, he had to have put in a lot of effort to capture the grace of Celestial Emperor, so it was so strong that it was even able to blow Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor back. Qin Mu was slightly worried. He had brought Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor into the painting to break his fear, but if he couldn't even defeat the Celestial Emperor in the painting, it might completely crush his confidence in himself. But at that moment, when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor slid down from the wall, he rushed to his feet blazing with fighting spirit that hadn't diminished in the slightest. After a moment, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor flew backward once more. Qin Mu sent his 8,000 swords to massacre the gods swarming over and looked at Imperial Preceptor who was on the wall. He saw that his face was all swollen and bloodied. This is troublesome. The power of this Celestial Emperor in the painting is probably even higher than that of a normal god. Just as he thought that, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor rushed back in again. Bang! Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was sent back once more. This happened over and over again. In front of Numinous Sky Hall's heavenly gate, the corpses of the gods and devils had already piled up, yet Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor still rushed at the Celestial Emperor at the top of Numinous Sky Hall time after time. He was beaten back again and again, his appearance growing more miserable with each time he was sent back. Qin Mu's gaze flickered as he prepared 5 Thunder Pot while thinking to himself, even if I have to risk my life to blow up this place, I can't let the Celestial Emperor in the painting to completely defeat Imperial Preceptor. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor rushed forward once more and all shouts of slaughter stopped. The expression of all the gods outside Numinous Sky Palace filled with terror, and they turned back to flee. Qin Mu was stunned. He turned back to take a look and saw Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor standing behind him with Celestial Emperor's head. Even though Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was covered in injuries, his smile at that moment was very pure. The two of them looked at each other and laughed loudly. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor raised his arm and tossed Celestial Emperor's head far out of Numinous Sky Hall. Raising the knife against the forbidden, out with the Emperor's head in his hand. Heaven Knife is truly heroic. I have finally comprehended the concept of his knife skills and knife path. Qin Mu was sore all over, but walked out of the hall with a smile. You are a big sicko, and your comprehension is too high. Grandpa Butcher had taught me for so many years before I comprehended the marvel of his knife skill. You walk the path of the sword, yet you could grasp the concept of his knife path. My comprehension is inferior to yours. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor turned around and said seriously, a person's comprehension will only increase as their horizons and experience grow. It's the same for wisdom as well. Your cultivation is still not high enough. When you reach my realm, you will be able to see through all profundities. In the future, you will not lose to me, but will only grow stronger. You could think of using the banquet of the celestial heavens to break the gods in my heart so I would be able to think straight, but I couldn't think of that. Why is Cult Master undervaluing himself? Qin Mu came to the throne of Celestial Emperor and pushed his headless corpse to the side before sitting down on the throne. He asked in astonishment, does Imperial Preceptor think I can surpass him, this straight line? You are the younger generation. If you can't surpass your seniors, wouldn't this world be too sad? On top of that, you are still the overlord body. Qin Mu grew full of confidence and nodded. That's right too. I'm the overlord body, so I'm definitely stronger than you. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's face blackened. Qin Mu shifted his butt to free a portion of the seat. Come. Try this place where only the Celestial Emperor can sit. Imperial Preceptor hesitated. This isn't good, is it? Come, just sit. The sight from here is good. Okay. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor came to sit by his side, and the two of them looked at the scenery outside Numinous Sky Hall. After a moment, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, the boundless world is under our eyes. In this position, one possesses boundless authority. The death of any world and any life lies with a single thought. Cult Master, have you ever had a desire for this kind of power? Qin Mu looked at him and asked in a leisurely manner, if I say yes, will you immediately get rid of me and save the Emperor from future trouble? There gazes me. Then Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked away. I won't. I will simply be on guard against you. He stood up and regained his calm expression. It was indifferent to the point that it looked like nothing could change it. And Qin Mu knew it. After experiencing the banquet at the Celestial Palace, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's Tao heart had entered a realm where not even gods and demons could predict his moves. His Tao heart had become indestructible. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor no longer had any more flaw in his Tao heart. Qin Mu stood up and walked out of the painting, seeming to have reaped his own gains. Only by breaking the despair in one's heart can one blaze with stronger hope and fighting spirit. The two of them walked out of the mural on the wall and stepped onto solid ground. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked back at the mural and saw that the palace was still standing. However, there were countless corpses of gods and devils everywhere. There were even some gods and devils shivering and hiding in corners with expressions of terror. Qin Mu went forward to erase the few brushes he had drawn, and the painting returned back to normal. He scratched his headband, said in puzzlement. The painter that drew this painting had extremely high attainments and was not inferior to me. However, why is his painting missing a corner? With his attainments, he could have given life to the people in the painting and let everyone in the banquet move and interact. However, with the corner missing, the world inside is dead. It should have been chipped off, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said while walking out of the hall. The battle outside should have ended already, right? It's time to let Xianxia reascend to her position of Palace Master and have West Earth come under Eternal Peace Empire. Qin Mu followed him out with a smile. If you had the decree of the Emperor and read it now, stating that Xianxia is the true Heaven Palace Master, the effect would be much better. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor took out an imperial decree and said, before I left on this journey, I had asked the Emperor to write the imperial decree. The Emperor is another old fox. Qin Mu sighed ruefully. After the two of them left the huge hall, a goddess suddenly moved in the painting. She looked around, and when she discovered that there was really no one around, she sneakily ran out of the painting. Tales of Hurting Gods. Chapter 470 True Heaven Old Mother. The goddess who escaped was none other than the goddess whose wine had been snatched by Qin Mu and whom he had sent flying with a kick. She ran to the corner of the wall, past a screen, and out walked a woman who looked completely different from before. She wore a circular silver accessory on her head and a short black gown, while black, high-heeled, and pointy shoes adorned her feet. Her dressing was like that of an ordinary woman of West Earth. So close. My true form was almost kicked out by that abandoned person. However, I had still given the game away. All the gods and devils could only say simple words like kill or evil creature while I said a complete sentence. The woman quickly rushed out of the main hall of True Heaven Palace. Sunlight shone on her pretty face, and she lowered her head while thinking to herself, the two of them might not have realized it yet, but if they think back, they will definitely discover it. I need to leave immediately, or should I get the 4 spirit beads first? Her footsteps were light and fast. In front of her was Qin Mu and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, so she slowed down. She acted normal and smiled at them, as if she was an ordinary female disciple of True Heaven Palace. Crap! Suddenly, Qin Mu's face changed slightly, and his fist smacked onto his palm as he cried out, I know where True Heaven Old Mother is hiding! Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was also extremely clever and immediately thought of the crux of the problem. Right, in that picture which was missing a corner, that goddess that was carrying the wine. He turned around and sprinted back to the main hall. He quickly said, we killed the Celestial Emperor in the painting, but even he didn't say a full sentence. Only that goddess alone had done that. He, however, soon walked out of the hall while shaking his head. The goddess that carried the wine is no longer in the painting. Qin Mu copied the tone of the goddess when he said his next words. Where is this brat from? This is the sacred wine for the high gods, so how can you touch it? This sentence is too complicated for the people in the painting. Its painter hadn't reached such skill yet, so the only goddess who could talk would be True Heaven Old Mother. How sinister of her to actually hide in the painting. I've underestimated her. A woman came to the two people's side and greeted Qin Mu. Cult Master Qin. Qin Mu's gaze flickered, but he smiled at her. Why isn't Sister greeting Imperial Preceptor? Imperial Preceptor? I've never seen him before. Is he that strong practitioner that killed Bago? The girl's expression filled with excitement, and she hurriedly greeted Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. She looked deeply into his eyes with tender feeling. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head. It's not her. After I came to West Earth, I didn't really show myself, so most of the women of West Earth don't recognize me. However, I killed True Heaven Old Mother's fake body, so she would recognize me. Qin Mu nodded and said to that woman, have you seen anyone walking out from that hall? The woman shook her head. I was going with Chief to snatch Vermilion Bird Bead and passed by here, but I didn't see anyone. Qin Mu mumbled to himself as he waved her off. The woman took a look at Imperial Preceptor, then lowered her head to walk by them. But Qin Mu suddenly pulled on her sleeves, and True Heaven Old Mother's scalp crawled. She almost couldn't stop herself from attacking. Qin Mu smiled at her. How do I address this sister? Which family are you from? Who is your chief? True Heaven Old Mother's face changed, and she knelt onto the floor while shivering. She kowtowed and said, I'm a disciple of True Heaven Palace, Cult Master. Please don't kill me. If I get recognized, my life will be lost. Cult Master, please pardon me. Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief and said to Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, I really thought she was True Heaven Old Mother. She's a god after all, so how would she kneel and beg a mortal? She's indeed a disciple of True Heaven Palace trying to escape with her life. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor waved his hand and said, You shall deal with her. Qin Mu helped True Heaven Old Mother up and said with a pleasant expression, Sister, don't be scared. There's no need to listen to others. They call me Heavenly Devil Cult Master, but that's just words. I'm actually lacking in confidence, so I called myself Heavenly Devil Cult Master to scare people since I came here alone. But I'm actually Heavenly Saint Cult Master. Our cult is the most kind and will never hurt people. I'm also a very kind person. Look, Imperial Preceptor is even one of the 4 great heavenly kings of my Heavenly Saint cult. That's right. What's your name? True Heaven Old Master was somewhat in disbelief. My name is Xianxia. You really won't hand me over. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor seemed to have remembered something. I'm going to announce the decree, so I have no time to stay here. Qin Mu followed Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor while holding True Heaven Old Mother's hand. I want to find someone, a youth called Pangong Tso and Grandmaster. He is the head of Roland's Golden Palace and had come to your True Heaven Palace once. Has Sister Siu seen him before? True Heaven Old Mother was pulled along by him because whenever she looked at Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, she didn't dare to struggle. I've seen him before. I only know that he's called Grandmaster and is a good friend of Elder Yu Qingchan. However, he's no longer in the palace. When he saw Cult Master Qin attacking True Heaven Palace, he ran. As expected of Grandmaster. Qin Mu sighed, then smiled once more. Sister Siu, follow beside me so you don't get bullied. That's right, the tracking of your West Earth is unrivaled in the world. Sister Siu's divine arts should be extraordinary, so you must have a method to track Pangong Tso, right? I'll protect you from harm and you will help me track Pangong Tso. How does that sound? True Heaven Old Mother was delighted. All right, deal. Qin Mu laughed and said, Why would I lie to you? Deal. Imperial Preceptor, read the Imperial Decree and come with me to chase after Pangong Tso. All right. I would also like to know who is the god behind Grandmaster and where is he hiding? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said indifferently. The expression of True Heaven Old Mother changed slightly. She had thought that Qin Mu would go with just her to pursue Pangong Tso. When the two of them were alone, it would be easy for her to kill this noble among the abandoned people. But the brat had actually invited Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. With him around, True Heaven Old Mother was in danger. Just a slight giveaway and she would be killed by the heartless fellow. With them being next to each other, if Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor attacked, she would definitely be unable to defend herself. But Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor following along is good as well, for it gives me more chances to get rid of him. I need the 4 spirits beads, though. Once I get them, the difficulty to get rid of Imperial Preceptor will greatly decrease. The influential families of West Earth finally pacified True Heaven Palace and slaughtered and captured all of you family's experts. The clans elected Xianxia as the palace master and Nai Kuei once again. She held Xianxia's hand and accepted everyone's worship. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor read out Emperor Yanfeng's Imperial Decree, and Xianxia immediately received it. In the meantime, Qin Mu pulled Xianxia over and asked for her green dragon bead and black tortoise bead, so they could play with them. True Heaven Old Mother looked at the 2 spirit treasures in his hands and fought against the urge to snatch them away. The 2 kids didn't listen to the decree. Instead, they played with the beads, flicking the 2 spirit treasures here and there, which made Xianxia giggle endlessly. True Heaven Old Mother's anger blazed, but she just turned around and pretended not to see so her irritation wouldn't grow. Suddenly, Qin Mu stuffed green dragon bead into her hands with a smile. Sister Siu, play with cheer for a while. True Heaven Old Mother held the green dragon bead while looking at the smiling Qin Mu in a daze. She had not the slightest idea what that youth was thinking. Green dragon bead is in my hands now and it can explode with the strongest power. If I act now, everyone in True Heaven Palace will be frozen and lignified. Her gaze flashed, but just when she wanted to make a move, she saw Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's clothes moving without wind, and she couldn't help feeling fear. This brat and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor are both old foxes. They are testing me. True Heaven Old Mother felt a chill run down her spine, then sat down to obediently play beads with Xianxia. In a bit, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor finished reading Emperor Yanfeng's Imperial Decree, and Qin Mu asked for green dragon bead back to stuff it into Xianxia's hands. After leading everyone to receive the decree, Xianxia called Xianxia over. She picked the 2 spirit beads and bowed. I'm willing to offer these 2 spirit beads to His Majesty and never betray him. The expressions of He Mu Yingxue and the rest changed slightly. Xianxia knew that it would be hard for her to rule West Earth and even 2 of the 4 spirit beads had been snatched away. so she just gave away the rest to Emperor Yanfeng. It was a simple method to hold back the methods of all the big families. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor only took the black tortoise bead. Palace Master also needs treasures to guard West Earth, so keep this green dragon bead. Xianxia gave her thanks and pulled Xianxia up. After the ceremony, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor hurried Qin Mu. You have left traces of your romantic endeavors all over the place, but you can't devote yourself to any of them. Be careful of losing your reputation like Jade Face Poison King and have no choice but to slice your face off. Break it to them quickly and let's go find Grandmaster. I'm not flirtatious, Qin Mu said while bracing himself to bid farewell to all the women. He looked at him with a deep gaze. Cult Master ain't going to stay for a few more days? There's still some stuff that's not done yet. Mu Yingxue was very straightforward. Little man, feel free to leave, but wait for me to climb into your window when I go to Middle Earth. Xianxia brought Xianxia to part reluctantly. If we didn't meet Cult Master, we would have died long ago and our corpses would be drying out somewhere in the wild. Cult Master is a huge benefactor of my Xiong family, so if there comes a day when you need something, True Heaven Palace won't disobey. Qin Mu smiled at her. There's no need for you to remember it so deeply since I was just acting according to my beliefs, not wanting to go against my nature. Nai Kue, cheer, farewell. All sorts of feelings welled up in Xianxia's heart as she saw him out of True Heaven Palace. She suddenly shouted loudly, "Righteous man!" Qin Mu was stunned. He then turned back to smile and wave his hand. Those words weren't the reason why he had saved the mother and daughter. He just couldn't bear to see Xianxia die under the hands of True Heaven Palace. However, now he was worthy of that title. Qin Mu jumped onto the dragon Qilin's back and pulled True Heaven Old Mother up. Imperial Preceptor, West Earth is a charming world. How will the Emperor treat it? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor slowly strolled through the air while saying calmly, "He will treat them how he has treated you. He has this breadth of mind. I had clarified it with the Emperor that I wanted to conquer West Earth, but not through force. The reason why I didn't mobilize the army was because I was afraid that it would destroy the peace here. The women here are so beautiful, and I didn't want any incidents like rape or pillage to happen. That's why I said to the Emperor that I won't bring an army of 1,000,000. I recommended one man who was equivalent to 1,000,000 masters in this man." He turned his head back to look at Qin Mu with a smile. "Is you. Under the sun, only Cult Master Qin can sweep West Earth alone." Qin Mu was slightly stunned, then laughed at him. "Imperial Preceptor is flattering me. Sister Siyu, don't you think so?" True Heaven Old Mother had a smile on her face, but she didn't say a word. Qin Mu stuffed black tortoise bead into her hands. "Sister Siyu, execute the spell. Let's quickly find Pan Gong Tso, that brat." True Heaven Old Mother gripped the black tortoise bead tightly, then glanced at Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. The middle-aged man had a hand behind his back clutching sword secrets.